What's up, ladies and gentlemen? My name is Clockwolf. Oh! And welcome to my review of Resident Evil 2. I just thought I would do this little intro sequence to let you all know that this is my first time reviewing a game on YouTube. I just thought that was important to sort of let people know that I'm not really entirely sure what I'm doing. But if this video goes over well, I might consider doing more reviews of other games. Or who knows, this might be the only review I ever put out on this channel. Who knows what the future will hold. And yes, I know that this game at this point is a few months old, and I know most people have already played it and moved on. But again, this is my first time doing a game review, and I just sort of wanted to collect all my thoughts into one location. It was kind of hard collecting my thoughts and my criticisms and my opinions all together and, putting them down in a way that makes sense, if you understand what I'm trying to say. But anyway, without further delay, sit back, relax, and let's get into it.
Resident Evil 2.
I think it's funny that I've been playing games for going on 20 years now, and I have actually never played any of the original Resident Evil games. Looking back today, I still don't understand why I didn't give the series a chance. I grew up playing the PlayStation 2, I was the right age for it, I was the right demographic for it, so I really don't know why I never even bothered to play the older games. I got my start in the series with Resident Evil 4, which is still to this day one of my favorite games of all time. And with so much universal love and praise amongst Western audiences, Resident Evil 5 had a lot to live up to. And when RE5 was finally released, it managed to refine the third-person camera, shooting mechanics, and gameplay systems that made RE4 notable for its time, without actually understanding what made the game so iconic in the first place. Resident Evil 4, in a way, was somewhat lightning in a bottle, shamelessly flashing its cheesy action B-movie story and lore while simultaneously striking a perfect balance between action and survival horror. This perfect storm made a particularly unique experience which would honestly be hard to copy again. Hell, even RE4 had some trouble keeping that formula consistent throughout its entire experience. Does anyone else remember the military island and how underwhelming it was compared to the windswept hallways and the sleepy villages of the first two-thirds of the game? This resulted in Resident Evil 5 being a game that was unfortunately directionally misguided, and its direct sequel being a game that was directionally unfocused. With the release of Resident Evil 6, players immediately saw the creative division within the Resident Evil franchise between action and survival horror, which was made obvious by the lack of creative focus from the game itself. The developers of Resident Evil 6 divided the game into 3 campaigns with 2 characters in each campaign, taking anywhere from 5 to 10 hours each to clear, thus forcing 8 individual playthroughs with each character to get the full story. 9 if you count the unlockable Ada Wong bonus campaign. The reasoning behind this direction was that the developers were attempting to give everyone who loved RE4 and the original RE trilogy, but for different reasons, what they thought that they wanted. With multiple playstyles stretched amongst multiple campaigns, RE6 was a third-person cover shooter, a third-person zombie action horror game, a light survival horror game, and let's just add some QTEs and linear stealth elements in there because why not? The end result was Resident Evil 6 being a jack-of-all-trades, master-of-none-of-them type game. I recall seeing something online at some point that said Resident Evil 6 is the antithesis of Resident Evil 4 in terms of its approach to action and survival horror, and I feel inclined to agree. But do keep in mind I am making these assertions off a distant memory and not recent experiences. I haven't played Resident Evil 4, 5, or 6 in years. Besides Resident Evil 4, 5, and 6, the only other Resident Evil games that I've ever played was Resident Evil Outbreak and Resident Evil Revelations. I don't remember much about Resident Evil Outbreak, but then again, that's probably because I was extremely young when the game came out. I remember all my friends when I was a kid were freaking out because it was the first Resident Evil game to ever come out that had proper co-op in it. I also remember being completely frustrated at the lack of tank controls, despite the game's choice to go for a fixed camera setting. And as for Revelations, I honestly cannot remember anything about it at all. Maybe it's because, unlike all the other games that I just talked about, I only played through Revelations once. I remember that you're Jill Valentine, and then you end up on a beach somewhere as a tutorial, and then you go to a cruise ship, and then the final boss is a turret section, and that's about it. That's about all I can remember from the game. Anyway, the creative division in 5, unintentionally caused by 4, turned into a lack of creative focus in 6, which resulted in both 5 and 6 being games that were as well made and fun as they were forgettable. I can't say much about Resident Evil 7 because I never played it, but from the outside looking in, 7 appears to be an attempt to right a trend of first-person survival horror games. A trend that was originally started by Amnesia: The Dark Descent back in 2010, and brought back in 2014 as a post-mortem for the now cancelled Silent Hill PT. 7 appears to be that very rare example of a game riding a trend and having that work out in that game's favor. But we've all heard this song and dance before. Resident Evil 4 is great, 5 and 6 almost killed the franchise, and 7 saved it, blah 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 blah. This isn't meant to be a dissertation of everyone's favorite zombie survival horror shooter franchise. God knows there have been a lot of those already done on YouTube by people who are way smarter than me. The reason I'm bringing this up is to make 3 points, one of which I'll bring up near the end of the video. The first point I wanted to make was that I have not played the original Resident Evil 2 classic game that came out back in '98. I noticed that there were a lot of reviews from people comparing the remake to the original '98 game, which I challenge whether or not calling that a review is even fair. I mean, don't get me wrong, there is value to be had in comparing the two, and it is fun seeing games of today compared to games made 20 years ago. At least most of the review channels I watch have enough sense to not call their comparison videos reviews. And with so many people comparing the remake to the original, I thought I would just make a review talking about the game as its own thing, as one of the few people who aren't seeing this game through rose-tinted goggles. Saving you a long-winded explanation on how tech worked back in the 90s, the reason the older Resident Evil games were made with fixed cameras was because back then having multiple zombies on screen at once in a 3D game setting required a lot of CPU processing power. The fixed camera was actually a trick to take the load off the hardware while simultaneously instilling a sense of fear of the unknown in players who have no way of knowing what's around the next corner. Nowadays, that's no longer a problem, with games being able to run acceptably and have dozens or even hundreds of zombies on screen all at once. Which is why, even though we've all been calling this game a remake, this game isn't just a beat-per-beat retread of the one from '98 with updated textures and a third-person camera. Oh no. With whole new rooms, pathways, enemy designs, and architecture to the various locations, this game is a very different animal to its predecessor, while still apparently maintaining the overall flavor. I'm pretty sure I heard at one point the developers said that this game was more like a reimagining than a remake, which I think is a perfect description. If you want to see a side-by-side comparison of the Resident Evil reimagining and the one from '98, I'll leave links in the description below to videos made by other better YouTubers. The second point that I wanted to bring up is that this is a remake or reimagining of a game that came out 20 years ago. With the fan backlash from 5 and 6, as well as the first-person trend writing of 7, and now the soft reboot of one of the older titles, it really feels like Capcom is winging it in terms of what they think they should do with the Resident Evil license. And with the Resident Evil 3 remake thing likely in development, as well as Resident Evil 8 already being confirmed by the developers of 7, I say look forward to more first-person Resident Evil games, as well as more reimagining, remake, remaster, whatevers of the older titles. At least for now, but really who knows what the future will hold for the Resident Evil franchise. All I know is that if you're someone hoping for a Biohazard re-game with the same fixed cameras and tank controls of old, I wouldn't hold my breath because I don't think you'll be getting that for a while. Geez, we're already 10 minutes into this video and I have yet to talk about the actual topic at hand. Sorry about that, I just needed to get some housekeeping out of the way. It's actually pretty hard to review or discuss this game without spoiling it. This game is the type of game that's best experienced if you go in blind. So this video is going to be filled with gameplay spoilers. Last chance to turn around, no going back. But first, let's talk about the version of the game that I bought. I pre-ordered the Resident Evil 2 Deluxe Edition on the PS4. I'm showing the Steam version because it's easier to record. The Deluxe Edition will set you back about $70. What do you get in it? Well, you get a few costumes, a handgun that's about the same as the gun you start with, and the original soundtrack from the game made back in '98. I'll just tell it to you straight. Unless you're a hardcore Resident Evil fan or you know for a fact that you will love this game, just buy the standard edition, and then maybe buy the original soundtrack for about $3. The gun you get is the Samurai Edge Albert Wesker model, which will cost you about $2. During my time playing the game, I only ever used this gun once, and that was to test it for this video. It's supposed to do more damage than the default handgun, but I really can't tell. Also, I got 2 pre-order bonus weapons, the Chris Redfield Samurai Edge and the Jill Valentine Samurai Edge. All 3 guns share the exact same gun model. One has more accuracy but has a slower rate of fire, and the other is vice versa. The amount of damage enemies take in this game is RNG, so I cannot tell if these guns are better than the default handgun that you start out with. Plus, the Samurai Edge uses the exact same 9mm ammo as the default pistol, which I am actually arguing is better than all 3 Samurai Edge pistols once you get all the upgrades for it. But if you are someone who wants to get the gun just because the model looks cool to you, you can just unlock another Samurai Edge by completing the game in a certain way. And yes, this Samurai Edge has the exact same gun model as the other 3, except for this one is vastly superior to the other 3 Samurai Edge pistols because it has infinite bullets. We'll get into how you unlock the infinite pistol later. But yeah, the default handgun is fine for when you start the game, and when you upgrade it later, it becomes even better. I'll talk a little bit more about the Albert Wesker Samurai Edge pistol a little bit later in the video and explain why it's not very good, but just trust me on this for now, don't buy it, don't even look at it. Other than that, you can get 7 costumes, 2 of which are free DLC, and the other 5 will cost you about $3 each. For Leon, you get the sheriff's outfit so you can pretend that you're Rick from The Walking Dead, and you can get this noir detective outfit that shows what Leon would look like if he ever learned how to comb his hair. Claire gets this military costume, which I like, and this noir costume, which I do not like. I don't know, it just looks like a Godfather cosplay to me. By the way, when you put the noir costumes on, the game gives you an option to put on a black and white filter so you can pretend that you're in Night of the Living Dead. That option is there for both characters' noir outfits. But never use this filter, okay? Never use it, all right? Never turn it on. It is awful. Don't get me wrong, the filter is fine in well-lit parts of the game, but a lot of areas in the game are super dark, and the black and white filter just makes it even harder to see than it already is. Claire also has this orange jumpsuit called the Elza Walker costume. This costume is essentially a purchasable Easter egg that's for fans of the older Resident Evil games. You can also download 2 other costumes for free for both characters. These costumes are the polygon models of Leon and Claire from the first game. I personally don't really like these. The costume models only affect Leon and Claire, and they look ridiculous, juxtaposed to the well-animated zombies and the other mo-capped characters in the cutscenes. By the way, all of these outfits stay on in cutscenes. Again, this is here for the fans of the Resident Evil 2 from '98, and maybe they were meant to look ridiculous, I don't know. I would have liked these a whole lot more if they had affected all characters, including the zombies, but as is, I don't think that these are for me. The only thing that's worth buying is the original soundtrack from '98, and it could have easily been included into the game for free. Actually, all of this stuff could have been included into the game for free. This game is the type of game that wants to find players that are willing to play the game over and over and over again, so my advice is to just buy the standard version with the original soundtrack for $3, and after you've played the main campaign once or twice, go ahead and buy the DLC pack if you still want to play. Okay, now we get into the review. I didn't mean the opening of the video to be as long as it was, sorry. But you know what? Let's just get into it. Let's lube up both of our fists and get elbow deep. Or, Let's just start the fucking video. Jesus Christ.
Resident Evil 2.
Again. So, you start the game as Leon or Claire. It doesn't matter which. The only difference between the two characters is the story, the guns you get between each character, and small differences in the environment. There will be 1 or 2 rooms in the game's levels that only one character can access, but you'll mostly be treading the same ground. For instance, in the police station there's a door that requires a heart-shaped key to open, but you need to play as Claire in order to get that key, so Leon can't access that room. Also, while the stories are different, the story beats will mostly be the same, with the cutscenes mostly triggering at basically the same time for both characters. Don't worry about it though. You'll get to play as the other character later, but we'll talk more about that in a minute. After you select which character you want to play, from there you'll choose your difficulty. The game has 3 difficulties: Assisted, Standard, and Hardcore. Assisted turns on the game's aim assist, which automatically snaps your crosshairs to zombie heads and the enemy weak points. You slowly but surely automatically heal from damage, and enemies are supposedly weaker. The Standard difficulty is, well, standard. Standard. In Hardcore difficulty, the enemies take more damage to kill, autosaves are turned off, and saving requires an ink ribbon. In this game, if you want to save your progress, you need to go to one of the many typewriters that are scattered throughout the game. Ink ribbons are things that you pick up in the world that allow you to save at typewriters. These only appear on Hardcore difficulty. On Assisted or Standard, you can just save at a typewriter whenever. Also, another thing that's affected by difficulty is the amount of items in the environment and their effectiveness. Healing items will be less effective at healing you, and ammo caches will give you less bullets. You also get less inventory space on the harder difficulties. After you choose your character and difficulty, you get treated to the sexiest burger eating physics I have ever seen. After the first cutscene, the game drops you off in a gas station as Leon. Or Claire. Again, you'll mostly be treading the same ground no matter which character you play. The gas station is the first tutorial area where you're going to be learning the basics of the game, such as moving, shooting, and picking things up. After you're done with all that, you get to the front door of the gas station where you're going to run into Leon, or Claire. Claire and Leon will then get into a car and drive to Raccoon City, where they get into a car crash and separated by an explosion. You'll then need to run through the city streets to get to the police station, and that's when the game starts. You'll solve puzzles, find keys to unlock doors, read notes, collect supplies to progress through the game. Oh yeah, and there's zombies. Lots and lots of zombies. So the game is divided into 2 parts: resource management and killing monsters. Let's start with the former. The game starts you off with 8 inventory slots. You'll be able to upgrade your inventory later. How much you upgrade it depends on the difficulty you start with. But no matter what difficulty you start off with, rest assured you will never have enough inventory space. That's where the magic box comes in. The game will mostly consist of you running from room to room collecting things, and when your inventory is full, you'll run back to store them in the game's universal storage unit. These storage boxes are connected, so if you put something in one box, you can pull it out in another box. And this goes for all of the magic storage boxes in the game. If there's a typewriter nearby, there's a storage box too. Items in this game are strategically placed, so when you run out of something like ammo, you'll likely find more in a nearby room. If not, then you'll need to go back to the magic box to get more ammo that you picked up earlier. You'll find different types of ammo for different types of guns. You'll also find healing items, of which there are 2 different types: healing sprays and herbs. Healing sprays boost your health back up to max. As for herbs, well, there are 3 different types: green, red, and blue. The game has a light crafting system where you can mix herbs together. I was gonna sit here and list off all the different combinations of herbs one at a time and explain their effects, But looking at the list of herb combinations on my monitor, I don't think I'll be able to talk about all of the different combinations and not confuse people. So if you want, just try experimenting with the herbs in-game yourself, or go look at the wiki. It would honestly be less confusing than listening to me try to explain it. I'll just go over the different herbs and some of the more important combinations. So, you got your green herbs that restore health, and blue herbs that cure poison. Red herbs are useless unless you mix them with either green or blue herbs. The two main combinations you'll be making are green herb and red herb, which, just like the health spray, fully restores health, as well as green, red, and blue herb. It fully restores your health, cures you from poison, and protects you from the effects of poison, and gives you a temporary defense buff that protects you from some damage, which is represented by a shield icon in the corner. Your health is represented in 4 colors: green, light green, orange, and red. If you played a video game before, you can probably guess what those different colors mean. Word of advice: if your health is in the red and you only have a green herb, unless you're desperate, just hold on to it until you can find another green herb or a red herb to mix it with. Otherwise, it'll just be a waste. There are 7 different herb combinations in total, but these are the 2 you're going to be using for like 80% of the time. It's a shame that the feature of mixing herbs isn't as good as it could have been, because other than healing you, the herbs only have 2 other functions: the defense buff and the ability to cure poison. The icon that tells you you're protected from damage is small and tucked into the corner of the screen, so a lot of players probably won't even notice it for a while. The game does have tutorials that pop up when you interact with something new, but let's be real here, most people are probably just gonna skip through most of them. After combining 2 herbs together, you can actually use the examine option to see what that mixture does in detail, but that's only after you combine them together. There's also a note you can find inside the dark room of the police station titled Medical Benefits of Herbs, but it doesn't really explain all the different herb combinations in detail. The closest this note gets to actually explaining the defense buff to the player is this part where it says, "Mixing blue and red herbs together produces a blend that will strengthen one's constitution." Well, what the hell does that mean? The note says that green herbs help heal basic injuries and blue herbs help treat poison, but it never really specifies what red herbs are meant to do. As I said, you're better off experimenting with the herbs in-game yourself because that's clearly what the developers were going for. The defense buff is a good way to go through a hallway filled with enemies and just tank all the hits. This is a sensible tactic to use when you need to get from A to B and don't want to use any ammo or any other equipment. It's a shame that it's a feature that most people are going to ignore because it's antithetical to the way players will most likely play the game. The ability to remove poison is practically useless because there are only 2 enemies in the whole game that can poison your character. You'll only see one for a short while in a specific area of the game, and the other is confined to the Ghost Survivors DLC. I'll talk more about being poisoned later in the video. The herbs have 2 other uses that actually affect the player, not the character. The fact that the herbs take up inventory space makes it so that the player has to be careful about what they pick up. You can combine herbs together, but not all herbs can be combined. For example, you can't combine more than 1 red and blue herb together into a single mix. You also can't stack herbs in your inventory. Another thing it tries to do is to make it so the player needs to take into consideration all the combinations of herbs they could use. I say try because it ends up being a redundant feature for the most part. That has to do with the way that health is displayed in this game. Your health is not only displayed by the colors of the health bar, but by the animations of the characters. There's a reason getting hurt in games usually has a visual effect that players can see. It's because it serves as a reminder to the player that they're about to die and they need to do something to stop it. This is usually represented by a health bar on the screen, a noise, or a visual overlay. For example, the screen getting blood splatter on it and turning gray in the Uncharted games. The health bar in Resident Evil 2 Remake is not on the screen and is only displayed when the player gets hit or goes into the inventory screen. Probably because the devs didn't want a gigantic health bar taking up too much of the screen. Clearly going for a minimalist on-screen UI when designing the game. When your character gets hurt and their health turns orange, they'll slouch as well as grunt and moan, which will get even worse when their health is in the red. This is the reminder the player gets from the game to heal up. Most players will take healing items not only to help the character not die, but because they'll probably get annoyed by their moaning and grunting and want them to shut the hell up. Your character won't whine about their boo-boos when their health is light green, only when it's orange and red. There's a reason I said only use a single green herb to heal yourself if you're desperate and about to die. It's because there were times that I've used a single green herb when my health was in the orange and it did nothing. But there were other times that I've done that and it brought me up to light green. I swear there's another layer of health between orange and light green that the game just doesn't show. There should be a yellow color for your health as well. Mellow yellow. Anyone else remember mellow yellow? I just wanted an excuse to walk down memory lane. Moving on. The way health works in this game isn't explained clearly enough or expansive enough to justify the depth that the herb crafting system is going for. And the fact that you're supposed to experiment with different herb combinations doesn't really help. Which is why most players are probably going to only be using these two combinations of herbs most of the time. This game does seem to have a lot of herb combinations, but it doesn't seem to really justify having so many of them. If the rule for green herbs was the same for red and blue, being that you can only combine one color herb with another color, it would have decreased the amount of combinations of herbs you can make, but it wouldn't have affected the game that much at all. In fact, I argue it might make the game a bit better, because it would have made the player focus more on the strengths of having to juggle multiple multicolored herbs, rather than focusing on giving the player superfluous options just for the sake of having more options. And yes, I do realize that at the end of the day, this is actually a really small criticism, but I thought it was still worth pointing out. Other than herbs, you can also craft bullets using gunpowder. This is less complicated. You just take 2 jars of gunpowder and combine them together to make more bullets. Simple. Okay, it's not that simple. There are 2 types of gunpowder, regular and high grade. You can make any combo of the 2 to create 3 types of ammo. Leon and Claire get different guns, so the kind of ammo you get depends on which character you play. You'll also be finding special defense weapons like flashbangs, frag grenades, and combat knives. Yeah, it turns out flashbangs actually work on zombies. Key items and weapon upgrades are also important. Key items are things you'll need to solve puzzles, open doors, and progress through the game. When you go into your menu and click on an item, the game will give you an option to discard items. And when it says discard, it means destroy. Your character won't just drop the thing on the ground when you discard it. It just vanishes from existence. You can't do this with guns, gun upgrades, or key items, by the way. If the game gave you an option to discard key items, you could end up destroying an item that you need to progress through the game. So if you pick one up, you will need to use it, or put it in the magic box. Key items will have a little red check mark next to them when you can't use them for anything else. After that, you can discard them. Also, when you equip a weapon upgrade on a gun, it will sometimes make the gun take up 2 inventory slots, which is why you're gonna want to pick up the pouches that let you expand your inventory by a few slots. The difficulty affects how many of these inventory pouches are in the game. Before we move on, let's talk about the puzzles in the game. There's not much to say about them except they're elaborate without being too convoluted. Most puzzles amount to using a key item on something in the environment, examining a key item in the menu, or combining 2 key items together. There's also some memory pattern puzzles, and some puzzles that require you to go on the other side of the map. While some puzzles are as simple as finding the combination to a safe or finding a key to unlock a door. That's why you'll need to read the notes that you'll pick up throughout the game. Some notes may contain important information, in-game lore, or even the combination to a safe. If you're having trouble keeping track of items that you need, or if you're afraid you're about to leave the area before finding something important, you can go over to your map and it will sometimes show you an item that you missed. The map has these color codes that tell you if you're missing something. If a room is blue, that means you got everything, and if it's red, that means you missed something. Keep in mind that something might be an item locked inside a safe or behind a gate. Also, you don't start the game with the map in your inventory, you'll have to go out and find those too. So basically just explore everything. And you are gonna want to explore everything because the last thing you are gonna want is to get trapped behind a wall of zombies or a boss with nothing but 5 bullets and a knife. This is something that people all over the internet have been getting frustrated over. That's because this is a zombie game where you're not supposed to kill every zombie you find. And if you try, you could end up getting stuck at a point where you don't have enough supplies to progress, and at that point you're pretty much fucked. All you can do after that is load a previous save or start the game over and try again, whilst trying to not use as many bullets. Resident Evil 2 is a survival horror game that does the former half of its tag well enough. The survival part isn't as well fleshed out as it is in some other games in the genre, like Darkwood for instance, but it's still serviceable for what it hopes to accomplish, and adds more depth and variety to enemy encounters. Next, let's talk about the firepower the game gives you. I'm just gonna rip some of this next part from the wiki just because it's easier. As I said near the beginning, both characters have different guns in the game, and at least one upgrade to go with each gun. For Leon, you get the HK-VP-70 handgun, or as it's called in Resident Evil 2, the Matilda. A Remington 870 shotgun, a Desert Eagle that's just called the Lightning Hawk, which is a pretty cool name, and a chemical flamethrower. The Matilda is the handgun you start out with as Leon. It has a 12-round magazine size, and can be upgraded to include a high-capacity mag, which will increase the magazine size from 12 to 24. A muzzle brake, which reduces the recoil and increases the overall accuracy. By the way, in this game, accuracy means the crosshairs zoom in quicker. And a gun stock that allows for a 3-shot burst fire function. But when you add the gun stock, it'll make the gun take up 2 inventory slots. The starting handgun is kind of a pea shooter when you start out, but the upgrades help out with that. Plus the fact that the 9mm ammo it fires is the most common ammo type in the game makes up for its low firepower. The W-870 shotgun is the second gun the game gives you when you play as Leon, and it does exactly what a shotgun is supposed to do. It's not very good at mid to long range, but it destroys anything it hits at close range. Being able to blow off zombie heads in one shot after being stuck with the default handgun for so long is one of the most satisfying things in the world. But you'll need to show some restraint because shotgun shells aren't as plentiful as 9mm bullets. The shotgun stock upgrade improves weapon handling, speeds up reloading, and increases the firing rate. By default, the shotgun can hold a maximum of 4 shotgun shells in its magazine tube. The long barrel upgrade can lower its shot spread and increase its maximum magazine size from 4 to 8. Adding the long barrel makes the gun take up 2 inventory slots, but you can remove and put it back on at any time from the inventory screen, if you want the extra inventory space. The Lightning Hawk is one of the most powerful weapons Leon gets in the game. It has a very high base damage and a high chance of critical hits. The heavy magnum ammo makes it capable of piercing through multiple enemies in a row, making it highly effective against a crowd of zombies. It also kicks like a horse in mating season with its crazy recoil, and is about as accurate as a drunk guy doing arithmetic. You can upgrade it later with a long barrel, which makes it take up 2 inventory slots. It'll reduce the recoil and increase the damage, as well as the red dot sight, which significantly increases the Lightning Hawk's aim time and adds a laser sight. The chemical flamethrower is, well, pretty self-explanatory. It doesn't have much of a stun effect against zombies because they can't feel pain, but it's much more effective against living monsters, doing effect damage over time, with its only upgrade part being the regulator, making it burn fuel slower. For Claire, she gets the SLS-60 revolver, the Browning high-powered Mark III handgun, or the JMB HP3 handgun, the GM79 grenade launcher, yes, you heard me right, she gets a grenade launcher, the MAC-11 SMG, or the MQ-11 SMG, and the Spark Shot. The SLS-60 is a 5-shot snub-nose revolver that the game gives you when you start playing as Claire. It has a slow reload time and favors careful aiming, being one of 2 guns in the game that favor shooting and moving. When you move using other guns in the game, the crosshairs become unfocused, but this doesn't happen with Claire's revolver or the handgun she gets later. Upgrades for the gun include the speed loader, which allows Claire to load the gun quicker, hence the name, and the reinforced frame, which allows it to shoot high-powered 357 Magnum rounds in addition to the starting 9mm handgun ammo, making the weapon extremely well-rounded and versatile, being able to combat every enemy type in the game. The JMB HP3 handgun is the gun that Claire gets to replace her revolver when you get halfway through the police station. It has a magazine size of 13, which can be upgraded to 26 with a high-capacity magazine. It also has a laser sight attached, making this very much a move-and-shoot type of gun, just like the SLS-60 revolver. Yes, getting this clip-loaded pistol does make Claire's revolver obsolete for a little while, but the reinforced frame you get later allows you to fire 357 Magnum rounds, which gives the revolver purpose again. So it does make sense to carry both guns at the same time and switch between the two, especially because even when both guns are fully upgraded, they only take up one inventory slot each instead of two. The GM79 grenade launcher actually doesn't have any explosive rounds and actually fires both acid rounds and flame rounds instead. The acid rounds do heavy damage to all enemies. Zombies covered in acid will have their limbs fall off, which is useful if you can hit a group of them in the legs. Flame rounds, upon being shot, creates a small fire in its area of effect, which stays lit for a small period of time. And much like the chemical flamethrower, the fire effect this weapon gives off is more effective against living monsters than zombies. You also can't craft flame rounds like you can other ammo types. You'll need to find them in the game, but you will need to use gunpowder to craft acid rounds. The only upgrade for the grenade launcher is the shoulder stock, which reduces its recoil and makes each projectile travel in a more stable trajectory, which, like the long barrel for the shotgun, can be removed and reattached at any time to make room in your inventory. The grenade launcher is a little overpowered for being the second weapon the game gives Claire, and I would have rather had it if the game switched it and the next gun around in their placement. The MQ-11 SMG's maximum magazine size is 24 by default, which can make it challenging for first-time users to handle, because of its high firing speed and moderate recoil. To counteract this, it's recommended to fire in short bursts or move closer to the targets. And since it fires in full auto, the SMG ammo doesn't do much damage one bullet at a time. If one bullet from this gun did as much damage as a 9mm handgun, it would completely throw off the balance in the game. You can equip a suppressor which will reduce the recoil and the sound of it firing, as well as a high-capacity magazine that increases the size from 24 rounds to 50 rounds. The Spark Shot is essentially a large stun gun, and being a stun gun, you guessed it, it electrocutes and stuns enemies in place. When you fire, you need to hold down the fire button for it to take effect. Don't make the same mistake I did when I first used it. The Spark Shot is a high-powered taser, not an electric bolt caster. The needle cartridge ammo for the Spark Shot is very rare and hard to find, so you're gonna wanna make every shot count. The Spark Shot only has one upgrade, which is the high voltage condenser, which makes loading the next shot faster. Weapon attachments or weapon upgrades are put in games for a variety of reasons. Sometimes they're practically useless and are only there to make the guns look different. In the case of Resident Evil 2 Remake, the gun upgrades are exactly that. Upgrades. Encountering more powerful enemies as the game goes on, plus the enemies you encountered already becoming harder to kill, makes it so that if you were stuck with a starting pistol and nothing else, beating the game would be a chore, even if the game gave you limitless ammo. It would have been really easy to put a ton of other guns into the game instead of upgrading the older ones, but then you run the risk of putting too many guns in the game. Even Resident Evil 4 arguably had more guns than necessary. As soon as you buy the automatic shotgun from the merchant, the one you get at the start of the game becomes permanently useless. Out of all the guns that you get in the Resident Evil 2 Remake, there isn't a single useless one. Nor at any point do any of the guns that you get during the start of the game become useless in the future when you fight against stronger enemies. The upgrades help contribute to this while simultaneously repurposing some of the other guns the game gives you, making sure that guns like the starting pistol never become permanently useless, and that there's never a point where one of your guns just sits in the magic box taking up room. In fact, the only time that happens is during the second run, where both Leon and Claire get an additional handgun each, both of which use large 45 caliber handgun ammo. For Leon, he gets the M1911A1 handgun with a 7-round magazine. It has a higher critical headshot chance than most of the other starting handguns. And it has high recoil because Leon holds it like this for some reason. The handgun Claire gets is a quick-draw army revolver that fires 6 shots in rapid succession. It's pretty good. Its main drawback is that each round needs to be unloaded and reloaded individually, making it so that this gun has the longest reload time in the game. Neither of these guns have any weapon upgrades, but you'll be using them most of the time during the second run in replacement of your starting handgun. The reason for this is because the game places ammo all over for you to pick up. and the most common is the ammo for the gun you'll be using the most. For the first run, this is Leon and Claire's starting handguns, but for the second run, it's the 45 caliber handguns. So all the 9mm ammo in the game is going to be replaced with the 45 caliber ammo. In fact, you can't find any 9mm ammo in the entire game during the second run. So if you want any 9mm ammo to use for your starting handguns, you need to craft it. But you can't craft the 45 caliber ammo, you can only pick it up. So if you're not careful, you might need to switch between the two once or twice. I'm listing off all the guns because I'm going to talk about some of the other enemy types in the game and how they're affected by certain guns over others. And because there's no practical reason for the Samurai Edge handgun DLC to be a thing. Yes, I'm still bitching about that. These guns are all optional DLC, which means they are not necessary to have in order to play the game. However, if you took any of the other guns that I just listed out of the game, it would completely change the way the game plays. The Samurai Edge Albert model has a 15-shot capacity magazine, and keep in mind it uses the same 9mm ammo as Leon and Claire's starting handguns. Leon's Matilda has a 12-round magazine capacity, and Claire's SLS-60 revolver holds 5 rounds. So you might want to buy it because you want a gun that has a slightly larger magazine capacity than the gun the game starts you out with. Well, no, because you'll get your very first gun upgrade within the first 20 or 30 minutes of playing. For Leon's Matilda, it's the high-capacity mag, which will increase the magazine size to 24 rounds. So if a bigger magazine size is the reason why you want to buy it, then that reason becomes obsolete within the first half hour of playing. As for Claire, honestly, even though her revolver only holds 5 rounds and can't be upgraded past that, once you get the speed loader, it's not that bad. Reloading Claire's SLS-60 with a speed loader and reloading the Albert Wesker Samurai Edge pistol takes roughly the same amount of time. By the way, the speed loader is in the exact same place as the high-capacity mag for the Matilda. But even if you absolutely don't want to play with a 5-shot revolver and you want a clip-loaded pistol when you play as Claire, just play the game for about an hour and you'll get one because you'll eventually find the JMB HP3 handgun, which has a magazine size of 13 that can be upgraded to 26 with a high-capacity magazine. So then you'll have 3 handguns, all firing the same type of ammunition, up until Claire's revolver makes a comeback with a reinforced frame, allowing her to shoot high-powered rounds that do almost as much damage as Leon's Lightning Hawk. And keep in mind, there are no upgrades in the game for any of the Samurai Edge pistols, so what you see is what you get. It gets even worse when you play either of the second runs. You'll mostly be using the 45 caliber handguns you get near the start. You'll be lucky to use the starting handgun at all, full upgrades or not.
But Clockwolf, it's not just a cosmetic thing. All the Samurai Edge handguns have different effects. It says so in the item description.
Do they though? I don't know if I've said this about 50 times already, but the enemies in this game all have an RNG damage mechanic applied to them. Here's a video comparison of all 4 Samurai Edge handguns side by side. This includes the Samurai Edge Albert model, the Chris and Jill pre-order bonus models, and the Infinite Samurai Edge handgun you can unlock just by playing the game and getting an S rank. I ran this test on the targets down in the shooting range as well as on zombies, testing both with focused headshots as well as unfocused and rapid-fire body shots. I legitimately couldn't see or feel a difference. The only difference to note that stands out to me the most is the fact that in some of the guns, the crosshairs just zoom in quicker than others. That's it. Can you tell the difference? Because I sure as shit can't. As far as I can tell, there only seems to be 2 reasons to get a gun like this. Either 1, you want it because it looks cool, or 2, you don't want to have to play the first hour of Claire's campaign with a 5-shot revolver. Which if that's what you want, then go ahead and buy it. I can't tell you what to do, I'm not your dad. But like I said at the beginning, I recommend you buy the standard edition and get the DLC pack separate after you've played through the main game like maybe 3 or 4 times, once you know you're down with the gameplay loop. The only reason I said to buy the original soundtrack first and separate when you buy the game is because I just like the OG soundtrack more than the new one. And even if you're only going to play the game a few times and never touch it again, I think you should do it to the OG soundtrack, which you can turn on and off in the options menu. Maybe you want the starting DLC handgun, but as for me, the Samurai Edge Albert model and both pre-order bonus weapons will be collecting dust in my storage unit forever. After you finish the main campaign once, you unlock the alternative costumes in the Costumes tab. Leon and Claire's alternative outfits are actually their costumes from the game made back in '98, only realized in full HD textures. I like Claire's original outfit more than I do Leon's personally. I don't know, I just kinda dig the 90s punk rock chick biker look that she's got going on there. Even though the knife on her shoulder can't really be used for anything, and it has a habit of clipping through her head when she's in some of the cutscenes. When you go back to the main menu, you'll see a new tab that says Second Run. This is where you'll get to play the other character that you didn't get to play in the first run. The story for both characters is different, so it's worth playing the second run after you're done with the first run, especially since you need to play the second run to see the game's true ending. But the thing is, both stories are supposed to be happening at the exact same time, which is why one of the first things you'll notice during the second run is the sheer amount of continuity errors in the game. Not just in the story, but in the gameplay too. You'll be fighting a lot of the same bosses and solving a lot of the same puzzles with different solutions. And at some point you'll ask yourself, if Leon and Claire's stories are happening at the same time, then how is it that one character is doing all this stuff when the other has supposedly already done it? Yes, I know it doesn't make any sense, and we'll talk a little bit more about it later, but that's just how it is. Before we move on, here's a few more tips from old Clockwolf. Resident Evil 2 actually does have some collectibles, 15 to be exact. If you shoot all 15 Mr. Raccoon bobbleheads in the game, you'll get a prize, and it's not just concept art. You can find most of these collectible bobbleheads on your own, but like most collectibles, you'll probably find most of them and then you'll need to look at a guide to find the last 2 or 3. You can actually do an about face or quick turn when you play that lets you turn your character 180 degrees around. It's back circle on PS4, back B on Xbox, or Q on PC. You can make your character turn around quickly by doing this. I really don't like it when reviewers talk about the options menu in a game, but when you start the game and you go into the options menu, switch the field of view slider up to max. I didn't even realize this game had an FOV slider at first, because I played it on PS4 and console games usually don't have those. You can even customize the color of your reticle and even your laser sights in the game. Also, the audio in the game is on headphones by default, just so you know. This game has some issues with the lighting clashing with the contrast, which causes this weird hazy gray effect throughout the game. To minimize this, when you start the game and it lets you set your contrast, turn the light and dark options both to maximum. And if you think that turning everything to bright will make this game easier to see and therefore less scary, you're wrong. It will actually make it harder to see, both in well-lit rooms and dark ones. Doing what I just highlighted will result in the game looking cleaner and being easier to see. Finally, remember that Resident Evil 2 is about resource management and resource conservation. Try your best to grab everything you can and use as few items as possible. Go in with this mindset and you'll be okay, and you'll never get stuck behind a wall of zombies with nothing to fight them off with. Okay, I think that's the basics covered when it comes to the survival half of the game. Now let's talk about the horror. Bleh! Yeah, you should probably just avoid playing this game if that actually fucking scared you. Do keep in mind that fear is a very primal emotion and horror is subjective by nature. For example, Slender the 8 Pages and Amnesia the Dark Descent. I find both of these games to be scary, but in different ways. But I've heard people say that Slender the 8 Pages is boring because it's a predictable and repetitive jump scare game. I've also heard people say that Amnesia the Dark Descent is boring because it's just a dark walking simulator with creepy noises and more reading material than actual scares. So what scares me may not scare you and vice versa. And all I can do is tell you what the game sets out to do. This being a zombie game, it will rely on gore, monsters, and body horror to scare you. Also, the atmosphere and darkness of your surroundings, as well as the occasional jump scare. In the original, the developers controlled what you were able to see through fixed camera angles. Since you couldn't always see the zombies closing in, you were forced to rely on listening to the game's audio to know what's ahead. To compensate for this, a lot of the remake is dark and has a lot of narrow hallways with sharp corners. If you're not careful, you could end up walking face first into a zombie. Your character also has a flashlight, but the beam is small and narrow, and that's by design. So you're forced to rely on listening to the environment in pretty much the same way as the old games. It also uses resource management to contribute to the horror as well. You'll always be struggling to find healing items and ammo, as well as inventory space to hold those things. So you'll constantly be feeling vulnerable. There's nothing worse than running out of inventory space when you need to pick up a key item and having to backtrack through a zombie-filled hallway to get to the magic box so you can make room in your inventory, only to need to go back through said hallway. Either that or discard your only health item to make room and hope for the best. By the way, this game does have a lot of backtracking, but the way this game is made keeps it from getting repetitive. Another thing the game does well is fear of the unknown, which never actually fully goes away, which once again is contributed to the game's RNG damage mechanic and the unpredictable nature of the zombies. I can't tell you how many times I shot a zombie thinking it was all the way dead, only to leave the room and come back like an hour later to have it pop out around a corner and lunge at me. Bleh. This game was made with the RE engine, or the Reach for the Moon engine, which handles dynamic shadows and skin textures very well, and it makes for some hideous looking zombies and some really dark hallways. The devs of this game did a good job making the best with the tools they had on hand. Which brings me to the other half of the game, and the real star of the show, the zombies. These zombies are probably some of the best video game zombies I've ever seen. Before this game came out, I was excited because I haven't gotten into a good zombie game in a while. To put it in perspective, the type of zombie game that I'm used to playing are games like Call of Duty Zombies or Left 4 Dead. So yeah, basically zombie horde mode games. This is very different, even in comparison to non-horde mode zombie games that I've played, like Dead Island, or even the much slower-paced 7 Days to Die, because in that game, the zombies are almost always predictable in their behavior. The zombies in Resident Evil 2 are designed in a way that they're always consistent without being too predictable. You know, the way a zombie should be. The unpredictability of the zombies stems primarily from the game's RNG damage mechanic. The amount of damage you inflict on a zombie is always consistent, but the amount of damage it takes to kill a zombie isn't. One thing I've never been able to understand about shows like The Walking Dead is how the military fell to a bunch of slow, shuffling corpses that only take one headshot to kill. I get that the zombie pop culture craze never happened in the Walking Dead universe, so no one knew that you had to destroy the brain to stop the zombies. But surely at some point, some soldier thought to themselves, shooting them in the body isn't working, so maybe I should try a headshot. And when they did and the zombie didn't get back up, it made them realize headshots were the way to go, so they told their buddies to start aiming above the shoulders. Why is it that never happened? Well, this game answers that question by making it so that you need to destroy the entire brain to put a zombie down for good. It can take anywhere between 1 and 11 well-placed headshots to kill a zombie completely, which is crazy inconsistent. The amount of damage it takes to kill a zombie is random, and it actually gets more random as you play. Resident Evil 2 has dynamic difficulty that essentially makes it so that the more enemies you kill, the stronger they become, with zombies requiring more headshots to kill, supplemented with the new and more powerful equipment the game gives you to get the job done. It's pretty obvious that when the game's developers were designing these monsters, the reward for a well-placed headshot would be a stunned zombie instead of a dead one. In fact, it's actually more consistent and reliable to shoot a zombie in the legs to stun them rather than shooting them in the head, which weirdly reminds me of Dead Space more than a normal zombie game. The zombies in this game will get harder to stun and kill the more you stun and kill them. And this will only be set back if you die as the game's way of showing you some mercy. When you aim your gun in this game, you need to stand there and wait for your crosshair to center on a target. Again, using the handgun that the game starts you out with as an example. When you do this, it causes the shots to be more accurate and deal more damage. You can move and shoot, but when your character moves while aiming, you're moving at roughly half the speed of a zombie when they're shuffling towards you. In fact, movement in general seems to be artificially slowed down to make the enemies more of a threat, with your character's running speed appearing to be really slow. The slow shooting speed and movement speed is a good tension builder when dealing with zombies and other enemies, especially when dealing with multiple zombies at once, but it makes fighting the bosses kind of a pain in the ass. Of course, this doesn't apply to all the guns in the game, with the upgrades you eventually acquire allowing you to aim faster, and some guns not requiring you to aim that much at all, focusing more on damage dealt rather than accuracy. Zombies in this game also have some damn good body destruction physics, as the game allows you to blow off zombies' arms, legs, and it's actually sadistically funny watching a stumpy zombie wriggle around on the ground trying to bite you. And yes, it is possible to put a zombie down if you shoot it in the chest enough times, but it's far less reliable than shooting them in the head, so I wouldn't advise it. Some will break and crawl through windows, which you can board up with wooden boards that you can find throughout the police station. FYI, you only use these wooden boards in the police station. Later in the game, you leave the police station and go to another area. After that, you never need to use those boards again. So don't be too afraid to use them. If a zombie grabs you, it will attempt to bite you, but you can defend yourself by stabbing it with a combat knife or shoving a grenade in its mouth. Be aware, if you do this, you'll lose the knife and you'll have to drop the zombie to get it back. And defending yourself with a grenade makes the grenade less effective to other nearby zombies when it explodes. Another thing that makes the knife useful is when you shoot a zombie and it falls down, you can equip a knife to slash it to see if it's still alive. Well, quote unquote alive. But be aware that knives have durability and can break when used too much. When you're fighting a zombie and shooting them in the head, what you're looking for is that really wet, meaty, satisfying popping noise that happens when the zombie's head goes splat. And after that, you know the zombie is all the way dead. There are even certain rooms in the game which zombies cannot enter, there being 7 in total and all in the police station. They're basically safe spaces for you and your character to rest, save, replenish health, and your supply of bullets. The overall movement of zombies in the game is somewhat random in its appearance. However, some zombies are actually hard-coded in some areas to break through windows, fall from the rafters, climb over furniture, and stand next to doors to ambush you when you walk through. Some zombies will appear to be just dead bodies lying on the ground and they won't move or anything. That is, unless you interact with them by shooting them or slashing them with your knife, or if you perform a specific action that's made to trigger them and make them stand up. You won't even get an option to defend yourself from a zombie attack if you're grabbed on a set of stairs. So, while the zombies seem totally random both because of the inconsistencies in which you can kill them, and because of the fact that they sometimes walk into walls and they have trouble navigating some basic geometry in the game. But in reality, they're actually programmed the same as most in-game AI, with just enough smoke and mirrors as well as some dynamic shadows to hide those basic video game mechanics and zombie mechanics we're all used to, which forces the player to look at the zombies and address them in a way that most people aren't used to in games. That's all the tips you're gonna get from me for dealing with zombronies, so you know what? Good luck. You're gonna need it, especially if you put the game on hardcore. As I said, the zombies in this game are good, but the question persists as to why. Well, most forms of traditional zombie media these days are presented as the Romero zombies. This topic could be a video all on its own, so I'm just gonna give you the short summary. Once there were 2 writers called George A. Romero and John A. Russo who got together and created a movie called Night of the Living Dead, which is seen as the first modern zombie film, or at least the first film to set the precedent of what zombies would become. But Romero and Russo had creative differences as to where the Living Dead media should go. So when it came time to make a sequel, they split the baby, creating 2 new movies, both of which are sequels to the 1968 cult classic, making Night of the Living Dead one of the few movies ever made to have 2 completely different direct sequels. Romero went on to make Dawn of the Dead, and Russo made Return of the Living Dead. Romero zombies followed rules that we see in traditional zombie media like The Walking Dead, where the zombies act like slow, shuffling corpses. Russo's take on the monster was actually far more campy and comedic. You know how in some zombie media, zombies will actually say things like, brains? That's a Russo zombie as opposed to a Romero zombie. One of the most consistent rules of Romero zombies is the fact that you need to destroy the brain to kill them. And brains are actually soft, squishy things. They're actually not that hard to destroy after getting past the skull. This creates a set of solutions that over time turn zombies into hazardous obstacles to be avoided rather than monsters to be feared. By tasking the player to destroy the entire brain, or in other words, shoot the zombie in the head multiple times, you end up with a game that has a very clever interpretation of the rules of Romero zombies. One that's quite refreshing for all the zombie media we watch. We all know by now that headshots and destroying the brain is how you kill a zombie. The zombie pop culture craze has effectively desensitized us to the fear these monsters once gave off. That's why in most media they feel the need to put a spin on the zombies by making different classes or types of zombies. Look at Dying Light as an example. They have multiple types of zombies and they aren't even zombies in this universe. They're called infected, even though they fit most of the Romero zombie archetypes. This is a way of keeping the zombie pop culture craze going by making slight changes to the monsters in that specific universe. All this comes down to is that having monsters that operate by a specific set of rules just gets boring over time. Hell, even The Walking Dead realizes the survivors in the show are zombie killing experts at this point. These days, the show focuses more on confrontations between the survivors and other people. By making this small change to the rules and with the gameplay controls and environment to reinforce those rule changes, it makes the zombies feel new. You essentially need to relearn how to fight zombies all over again. It's actually bizarre looking at the videos from when I first started playing. It's like seeing home movies of yourself as a kid 15 or 20 years later. When you start the game, you're like an infant learning the basics of movement, and when you're in the home stretch of the game, you'll have better weapons, more supplies, more inventory space, and a better understanding of how to deal with zombies. By the time you complete the game's first and second runs, you'll know most of the ins and outs of the game. The more you play, the more you learn, and eventually you'll run through the game like a badass from the starting tutorial area onward. And that's what this game does at its best. It gives the player that power fantasy of slowly becoming a badass action hero, without making you one right when you start the game, or locking the kill zombies quick ability behind a skill tree or something. You instead learn through old-fashioned trial and error. The fact that this game somewhat circumvents player expectations, and can actually make you feel vulnerable against zombies in a medium where zombie power fantasies are so common, as well as give the player that power fantasy so naturally over time, is probably one of the biggest accomplishments this game makes. Which is why I would highly recommend this game for zombie fans. In fact, I recommend this even more if you were a fan of zombies a couple years ago, but not so much anymore because you were overexposed to the medium. I think it's really possible that this game could reignite your love of the zombie franchise if you've been burnt out on the trend for a couple of years. Now let's talk level design. There are 3 main areas in the game: the police station, the sewer, and the underground laboratory. I think the best way to convey this one to you is to start from the beginning. The first place you'll go to is the police station, which is where roughly half the game is going to take place. You start off in a large open main hall with a front desk, a statue in the center, and 2 flights of stairs in the back, leading to the second floor. There are 2 halves of the police station, the east and west area, with 3 floors and the main hall separating both halves on each floor. If you go to the right, you have a doorway blocked with a shutter leading to the east area. If you go to the left, you have a door that leads you to the west office, and another shutter that takes you to the reception area and down a long dark hallway that loops around the west area. Let's start with the east area and go up floor by floor. Starting with the first floor, you walk into a dark, flooded hallway. From there, you have the east office, the press room, the woman's bathroom, and the fenced-off back area with a fire escape that leads to the second floor. You also have the watchman's room with a back shutter leading to another hallway with stairs leading to the basement and a break room which is also a safe room. The east office is a room with 2 doors, a row of desks, a smaller group of desks to the side, a window that zombies can crawl through, as well as one outside in the hallway, 2 interior windows, and a small side office. There's actually a lot going on in this room. You have furniture in the room that you can use as a barrier to keep enemies away from you and play a game of Ring Around the Rosie with others. Although zombies can climb over desks, so yeah. When going into the room, zombies will sometimes stand in the small office to ambush you when you're running to the other door. If you're standing behind the double doors, zombies may be standing on the other side waiting to ambush you when you come through them, so you should use the small window in the flooded hallway to your advantage. The press room is a spacious, well-lit room with a single desk that can be used as cover. The woman's bathroom is just a small room containing a single health spray. You're not going to use that room more than once, but you are likely going to be using that fire escape more than once. The watchman's room is just a way to separate the 2 hallways with a shutter, a door, and an interior window. Going to the 2nd floor and starting from the lobby, you go into the waiting room and go into the hallway. From there, you can go left or right. On the right, you have a door to the fire escape, which will take you to the 1st floor. Keep going and you'll run into the door going to the roof. The roof has a ladder leading to the 3rd floor balcony and a set of stairs in the back that allow you to reach the back alley and a boiler room with another save room in it that you can only access if you play as Leon. If you go left, then you have an art room, a shutter at the end of the hall, a stairwell that leads up and down, and the chief's office. The chief's office is a save room and can only be accessed if you play as Claire. It's connected to a private collection room and an elevator that connects you to the basement. Also, if you play as Claire, you can't open the shutter in the hallway. You can only do that as Leon. And if you play as Leon, the ladder connecting the roof to the 3rd floor breaks when you try to climb down it, but not if you're playing as Claire. These small changes completely change how you'll navigate this part of the police station depending on which character you play. And I honestly wish they did more stuff like this throughout the game. Going back to the stairs, you can go up or down. If you go down, you'll end up in the hallway that leads to an interrogation room, as well as an observation room. You're likely not going to be visiting either of these 2 rooms twice. If you go up to the 3rd floor, you come to a small room with a door leading to the 3rd floor balcony, as well as the east storage room with its own storage closet and door on the other side that connects to the main hallway on the 3rd floor. The east storage room is a small zombie-filled maze with boxes and shelves that you'll need to navigate at least once to get 1 or 2 key items. Going to the west area, you have the west office, which is just a diet version of the east office. The operations room, a back room that just serves as a connecting hallway. The records room and the safety deposit room, both of which have something in the middle of set room to play a game of Ring Around the Rosie with potential stalkers. As well as a stairwell leading to the 2nd and 3rd floor, and the dark room, which is another save room and arguably one of the most important save rooms in the game because of its positioning. Going back to the 2nd floor, you have the shower room, which is mostly a glorified hallway, but we'll count it anyway. The linen room, the lounge, the STARS office that also doubles as a safe room with an adjacent armory, and the library, which takes up both the 2nd and 3rd floor for the unique opportunity to take the high ground, as well as the west storage room and the clock tower on the 3rd floor with a small adjacent dead-end hallway in the back. In total, I count 50 areas in both halves of the police station. Those quote-unquote areas are rooms and hallways in both the east and west halves of the police station. These areas include the flooded hallway, the small filing room, the east office, the press room, the woman's bathroom, the watchman's room, the fire escape, the break room hallway, the interrogation/observation room hallway, the interrogation room, the observation room, the back alley, the boiler room, the janitor's room, the reception area, the west office, the west central hallway, the dark room, the safety deposit room, the operations room, the supply room, the records room, the southwest hallway, the waiting room, the 2nd floor east hallway, the art room, the roof, the 2nd floor east stairs landing, the chief's office, the private collection room, the connecting hallway, the roof terrace, the 2nd floor west stairs landing, the shower room, the STARS office with the adjacent armory, I'm counting them both together, the 2nd floor west hallway, the linen room, the lounge, the library for both the 2nd and 3rd floor because they're both technically part of the same room. the 3rd floor east stairs landing, the balcony, the east storage room, the small storage room adjacent to the east storage room, the 3rd floor west stairs landing, the private study, the 3rd floor northwest hallway, the 3rd floor southwest hallway, the west storage room, and both levels of the clock tower for the same reason as the library. Of all those rooms and hallways in the police station, there are 7 safe rooms, and when I say safe rooms, I don't mean rooms to save your game. I mean enemies cannot follow the player character into these rooms. Not all safe rooms will have typewriters in them. Also, a total of 13 different areas that the player won't likely visit more than once. That is assuming the player wants to make the whole map blue and pick up every item in the police station, as well as solve every puzzle and grab every weapon and every upgrade for said weapon. You'll likely need to visit most of the areas in the RCPD at least twice. Backtracking in games has gotten a bad reputation over the years because of how easy it is to screw up. In this game, it's done well because it gives the player the incentive to explore everything by rewarding them with more supplies and new areas to explore. And it's not just exploring for the sake of exploring either. The whole police station is like a giant puzzle box with doors that can be unlocked by keys that are usually scattered all over different areas of the building. Take a look at the map. If you observe it closely, you'll notice how every area in the game loops into each other. There are so few dead ends in this game, with most hallways and even most rooms having at least 2 doors to get in and out, ensuring a consistent level flow throughout the whole experience. The only time this level flow is interrupted is when you run into a locked door or entrance, or if you run into a monster that's trying to kill you. That is the reason why you're going to want to explore the game. It's not just,
Oh, look, it's a new room I can go into.
Opening a path through a new area helps improve the level flow, therefore improve the way you can navigate the police station. That's the reason why this game is paced so well despite the fact there is so much backtracking. The level flow and the level design contributes to this immensely. Every time a new area is opened up, it helps improve the level flow, therefore improves the pacing of the overall experience. To accompany all the inevitable backtracking you'll need to do, the game throws 2 new monsters at you. And it seems the first one requires you to deal with it in almost the complete opposite way you deal with the zombies.
What in God's name?
The Lickers are a staple in the Resident Evil franchise, as iconic as Albert Wesker, Nemesis, or Jill sandwiches. These monsters crawl on walls and ceilings, using their claws and long whip-like tongue to attack people. They're also completely blind, so they need to rely on their sense of hearing to find targets. And if they hear you, you're pretty much screwed because they are crazy fast. If one hears you and you try running away, you might get through the door to the next room before it slashes you in the back. But you'll probably be like me and run through the door as it slashes you in the back instead. The best way to deal with the Lickers, at least if you're playing as Leon, is to walk past them slowly. As long as you don't run, shoot, or bump into them, they won't attack you. You can use stun grenades to deafen them temporarily, but this has some drawbacks. After using a flashbang on a Licker, it'll start doing a slashing attack. This will make it really hard to get past them if they're in front of you, and most of the Lickers you see will be encountered in small hallways. And if you try to use the flashbang as a distraction as you run away, it probably won't work either because most of the time, Lickers are actually faster than the time it takes to equip, throw, and detonate a grenade. You need to be careful when you play as Leon because he doesn't get weapons that are super effective against Lickers until like halfway through the game. If you play as Claire, however, then it's a different story. I have no idea why the developers chose to give the players the best tool to deal with Lickers right away if you play as Claire. Just shoot the Licker with a fire grenade if it's on the ground. That way it'll stand in the fire and continue taking damage. If the Licker is clinging to the wall or ceiling and you shoot it with a fire round, the fire will go out when it falls off. So hit it with the acid rounds to make it fall down first, and then use a fire round to finish it. All it takes is one fire grenade from Claire's grenade launcher to kill a licker. And once Claire gets a hold of the suppressor for the MQ-11 SMG, she'll have another gun that's really effective against lickers. Because they're attracted to sound and the suppressor pretty much does what it does. The lickers are the first non-zombie enemy you encounter in the game. And when you play as Claire, the first gun the game gives you is the best licker killing tool. They really should have switched the placement of the MQ-11 SMG and the grenade launcher around. I know new players won't have any way of knowing that, but still. It almost makes me want to recommend that new players play as Leon first. So that way the initial impact of them encountering their first licky boy would be more likely to leave a bigger impression that would last much longer. Problems aside, the lickers are a good second enemy type to encounter. Zombies are slow and dumb, and you may have been shooting and running past them, but dealing with these Gene Simmons impersonators will require a much more passive and quieter approach. These enemies do complement each other well and will only be made more of a threat when paired with another trench coat wearing one.
Jesus Christ!
Mr. Tyrant X gonna give it to ya, and yes, that is his full name, actually looks a lot scarier than he is. In fact, his appearance is almost cartoonish looking. This has to do with both his work attire and the fact that his face is mocapped by Dolph Lundgren. I know his trench coat has a tactical purpose because it's armored and it stops him from mutating, but I like how he has a little hat like that's somehow gonna help him blend in more. By the way, you can shoot the hat off his head to get an achievement, but doing that will make him chase you faster. And can you really blame Tyrant Thanos for getting pissed at you for shooting off his infinity hat? Seriously though, Mr. X is intimidating and imposing when you first see him, but the more you play, the more you learn about how one-dimensional he is. In fact, he's probably the second most one-dimensional enemy in the whole game. He's sandwiched between the zombie dogs and the most one-dimensional enemy in the game, which we'll talk about later. The idea of Mr. X is where most of the fear comes in, an idea that's mostly planted in the player's head through sound design. More specifically, the soundtrack and the sound of Mr. X's footsteps getting closer and closer to the player. That's not to say Mr. X himself isn't scary. He's a large, mysterious, humanoid figure that follows you around when you don't want him to. He will chase you all over the police station, but all he does when he catches up to you is punch you. You would probably expect a Mortal Kombat style finisher insta-kill move or something, but no, he just punches you. The Tyrant has a total of 5 features. Only 2 of those are unique, and they're both basically the same thing. His first ability is a basic attack in the form of a punch. A grab ability where you'll need to use a defense item to get him to let you go, which every enemy in the game has. The ability to push you down if you try to run past him, which we'll talk a little bit more about later. The last 2 abilities are technically the same thing, which are the fact that he can follow you everywhere in the police station and that he'll sometimes teleport to head you off when you go to a certain room. Once Mr. X shows up, the lobby of the police station is no longer a safe area, because when he's not chasing you, he's walking around the police station looking for you. He can go into any room in the police station with the exception of this list of rooms here on the screen. Luckily, most of the rooms have some furniture or something in the middle of them that allows you to loop around him to the exit if he catches you off guard. Unlike the lickers and zombies, Mr. X can follow you almost anywhere and into almost any room. And that really speaks to his purpose as a video game mechanic. Remember that push ability he does if you try to run past him? It doesn't really do all that much damage when he does it. Even if you put the game on hardcore difficulty, it'll only knock your health down a single peg. He's actually not really that dangerous in big open spaces like the lobby or the roof. He's actually surprisingly slow and easy to avoid just by running away. He's a lot more of a hassle to deal with in hallways and small rooms. He operates more like a moving wall, pushing you into the other enemies and making you go in directions you don't want to. Like when you're trying to sneak past a licker but you hear Mr. X's footsteps coming to you closer and closer and closer, forcing you to hurry. After all, by the time he shows up, you'll have over half the police station explored, and most of the locked doors will be opened. You'll likely need to go places you've been before, not because you're looking for supplies, but just because you're trying to put some distance between yourself and the tyrant. Mr. X can't be killed, so don't even bother trying. If you shoot him in the head a bunch of times, he'll kneel down for a solid 30 or 60 seconds for you to run away. But he will eventually stand back up again, it's only a matter of time. Shooting him in the head is essentially just a waste of bullets. It doesn't matter how many times you shoot him in the head or what you shoot him with. You can only stun him, you can't kill him, don't even try. He's also somewhat scripted and won't always just search for you randomly. There are 1 or 2 instances where he'll teleport to you if you're in a specific room or performing a specific task. There's even a jump scare where he'll walk into the press room and punch a hole in the back wall when you're leaving the observation/interrogation room area, which is apparently an Easter egg from the original game made back in '98. This event only seems to be triggered if you're in the observation/interrogation room and he makes it to the back press room wall from wherever he is before you leave, making this jump scare something totally skippable. I didn't even see it until my 4th playthrough, and I've only seen it 1 other time, even though I've played through the game about 18 or 20 times by now. And even though Mr. X isn't the most complex enemy ever, he still does a good job at ramping up the pacing in the police station. By the way, I want to take another moment to gush about the pacing. The pacing in this game is so good. It's mostly an accumulation of everything I already talked about. The extremely versatile nature of the zombies, the light stealth mechanics of the lickers, the atmosphere and darkness of the environment, the game's dynamic difficulty mechanic that makes the game harder the more you play, the backtracking, making you revisit the areas of the station that you know are dangerous, making areas of the station that used to be safe dangerous by spawning in enemies that weren't there before, the placement of supplies for you to collect, Mr. X, it all works so well, constantly contributing to the pacing, allowing the player to feel like they're making progress without letting them think they're no longer in danger, which I feel shows a balance of both efficiency and effectiveness in the design of the game. The pacing of the first half of the game and how it doesn't lose any steam well after a lesser game would have is probably this game's 2nd biggest accomplishment, just behind making zombies scary again. So it's a real shame that the rest of the game can't live up to that pacing in the same way. As I said before, Leon and Claire have different stories, but almost all the cutscenes trigger at the same time for both characters. That's because you'll be visiting mostly the same locations no matter which character you play. The only real example of the story ever truly separating Leon and Claire's gameplay paths is the journey between the police station and the sewer. With Leon, you need to go through this glorified QuickTime event with no button prompts. Why do game developers think that making players run towards the camera and avoid obstacles in their path is a good idea? After that completely out of place nonsense that feels like it belongs in a different video game, you get to play as Ada Wong for a little while, the red dress wearing femme fatale. It does kinda suck that you need to play as what feels essentially like a downgraded version of the character you were just playing, but it's short and there are some new puzzles to do. With Claire's campaign, however, you play as Sherry in an orphanage. You solve 1 or 2 puzzles and have a stealth section with an automatic fail state. I like stealth games. Splinter Cell, Metal Gear Solid, Hitman, I even played the old Siphon Filter games back in the day. I've played all the greats, so I can spot if a stealth section is good or bad. This one is bad. This stealth section requires that you don't get spotted by the Raccoon City police chief. And if you get spotted by him once, that's it. There's no warning or heads up that you're about to be spotted, and if you get caught, there's nothing you can do to stop it. The way Chief Irons moves through the small room you're hiding in means that you need to move from your hiding spot at least once to avoid getting seen. And you won't have a lot of places to hide in general, so this means you'll need to anticipate his movements to predict exactly where he'll go and where he'll look for you. This section of the game is mostly a trial and error run because of the limitations placed on the player. To make matters worse, the game will ask you to get a key to open a door out of the room when Irons goes to wash his face in the bathroom sink. Now, one would assume that you're supposed to use stealth to sneak up on Irons and take the key from the door before he turns around, because he can't see with his face in the sink, but he can still hear, and the key is right behind him. So even if he doesn't hear you go up to the door, he would probably hear the key being taken out of the lock if you're not careful. And since the lock is so close to Irons and he's standing right in front of a mirror, if he heard you, he could just look up, see you in the mirror, quickly turn around, and grab you. But no, you're supposed to run over to the bathroom, grab the key from the lock, and run to the exit, and for some reason he can't hear you do this, even though if you try to run at any point during the hiding phase of this segment, he will hear you immediately. I wager most people who played this for the first time failed at least once. Good stealth in games is a balance between having multiple ways to avoid detection and multiple ways to be detected. How a player is detected and how they can avoid detection should also be conveyed in a way that they can begin to understand. Here, the ways you get detected are either that you get seen or heard by Irons. And the ways you avoid detection is just to crouch walk around the room and hide to avoid those two things from happening. But the game never says where you should hide, as good hiding spots are vague and few at that. It's often unclear where he'll look for you or what direction he'll go, and just when you get used to the vague rules of this section, it throws it all out the window when he goes to the bathroom. It's for this reason I believe that stealth game veterans won't have any less of a hard time with this section of the game. In fact, I think people that play a lot of stealth games will have more trouble with this, because it lacks all the conventional rules of a traditional well-made stealth game without offering any clearly explained alternatives. The next area the game drops you in is the sewers. I'm not going to bother giving you the full tour because the layout of the sewers is much smaller and simpler than the police station. Plus, the area isn't all that interesting. The police station is a large, sprawling complex of rooms connected by hallways that's divided into two halves by the main hall, whereas the sewer is a long, 3-level series of tunnels and walkways with the occasional room. Because, you know, of course it is. It's a sewer, you get what you sign up for. The 3 different levels in the sewers are connected by stairs, chutes, ladders, an elevator, and a water slide, as well as being home to a new squishy-looking enemy. The G-Adult Sewer Monster isn't my favorite enemy in the game. They're just so underwhelming compared to the lickers and zombies. The sewer monsters have 6 abilities, and 2 of them are him just hitting you with either a large swing with its large tumor arm, or a large slam attack. One of his other abilities is that he can spit out small parasite, facehugger, chestburster-like monsters that slowly swim toward you. These monsters will only spit out 3 of these at a time and will do so one at a time, making them easier to shoot. And it doesn't help that they swim towards you single file in a straight line. You can kill these things with 1 bullet, even if you're using the weakest ammo in the game. The other 3 abilities it has is one where it grabs you, a lunge attack where it swims towards you really fast and grabs you, or one where it pops out of the water and grabs you. And when it grabs you, it spits up poison on you unless you use a defense item. Most of the sewer monsters' attacks involve grabbing and poisoning you. The way poison in this game works is that it causes you to take damage until it's cured, and your character will go into coughing fits which will interrupt your ability to aim, as well as hiding the health bar status by turning it purple, that way you can't see how close you are to death. Remember those blue herbs that cure poison? You'll need to take one in order to stop the poison effects. It's an interesting mechanic that's ruined by one thing, and that's the fact that the sewer monster is the only enemy in the game that uses poison at all, other than one of the monsters in the Ghost Survivors DLC. By the time I made it to the sewers, I had already collected a lot of blue herbs. So when I got poisoned for the first time, I needed to run back to the nearest save area to get one from the magic box and cure myself. That's only if you get poisoned and don't have a defense item to defend yourself with. But the zombies in the environments they're in are versatile enough that you can adapt multiple tactics to be effective in different given situations. And the lickers let you utilize some light stealth mechanics to sneak around them. And these sewer monsters are big, almost as big as the tunnels that they're in. So you can't get around them without getting in striking distance, and if you try, you'll probably get hit, grabbed, or stuck on something in the environment. They can't leave the water, and if you try getting out to shoot at it so it can't get you, it will go under the water to hide. The best way to deal with the sewer monsters is to keep your distance and shoot at its weak spot on the side. which, since it's slow and doesn't have any ranged attacks other than the parasites, it's easy to do. Either that or you can just let them grab you and use a defense item on them. The second best way to deal with them is to mix a red and blue herb together to give yourself a defense buff and protect yourself from the poison effect before they grab you. This idea is kinda cool, but as I said before, using the defense buff to tank damage and attacks is antithetical to the way most players will play the game. Mostly because in this game, doing so is not very fun. Tanking damage from enemy attacks in games can be fun, usually by making the player feel like their character is invincible, at least for a few seconds. But even when you have protection from the sewer monster's poison, when they pick you up and throw up on you, you still take damage. And when they do this, an animation plays out. I'd say roughly 2/3 of the attacks from enemies in this game in general have animations attached to them. These animations zoom the camera into the character when they get attacked. This is a constant reminder from the game to the player that their character is taking damage, whether they can see their health bar go down or not, which makes it really hard to feel like you're invincible. And even with an extra layer of protection for your health, getting unexpectedly jerked out of the gameplay and into a cutscene where you have to watch your character get attacked is really annoying. In the police station, the question was, do I use supplies to kill these monsters, or do I just try to go around them? And here it's, do I use supplies to kill these monsters, or do I use supplies to go around them? This is caused by the design of the monsters themselves, and the fact that the sewer level is smaller and the sewer monsters are introduced early on. So you naturally have less options to get around the area. Before, when you were in the police station, most rooms had furniture or multiple exits to help you avoid confrontation altogether. With the sewer monsters, usually the only way to get around them without killing them is to run right past them. It is possible to get around the sewer monsters without getting grabbed, it's just difficult to do. You can fake them into a grab the same way you do with zombies, but this takes a lot of practice. You can shoot the zombies to stun them and get around them that way, but stunning sewer monsters is actually so hard to do that you're more likely to kill them before actually stunning them. The first half of the game was about figuring out the most effective way to get somewhere and how it can be done in the most efficient way possible, which contributed heavily to the pacing in the police station. And since these monsters are inefficiently designed, that means the game leaves the player with the task of dealing with these inefficient monsters in the most efficient and effective way possible. Or to put it another way, there is no best way to deal with the sewer monsters in any of the situations where the game expects you to. And if there is, then the focus is on which item to use to get the job done, rather than what actions does the player take. Since the choices of the player don't matter as much, the strategic element in real-time decision-making that was there before is gone. You're going to need to go through most of the tunnels in the sewers at least twice anyway, so the easiest option to deal with these monsters is just to shoot and kill them. Keep in mind, this game is about resource conservation, so just because this option is the easiest and best option doesn't mean that it's a good one. I bet there were a lot of people who just barely got through the police station, and by the time they got to the sewer, they were low on ammo. So they were left with the choice of either needing to completely restart the game, or they had to go through the pain in the ass process of getting around the sewer monsters without killing them. At a certain point, you get a new weapon from the sewers that is a great sewer monster killing tool, but by the time you get your hands on it, you'll have gone through most of the sewer monsters in the game. Claire gets the spark shot and Leon gets the flamethrower. Speaking of which, how many of you thought that fire weapons wouldn't work on the sewer monsters? Maybe there's something wrong with me, maybe it's because I was a 90s kid, but something that I remember from the adventures of Ash, Misty, and Brock was that fire-type Pokemon are not very effective against water types. So I didn't even try fighting any of the sewer monsters using any of the fire weapons for a while, believing that they wouldn't work and it would just be a waste of ammo. Fire is very effective against plant-type Pokemon, however, but I'm getting ahead of myself. By the way, these are some of the most well-lit sewers of all time. I wonder who's the guy whose job it is to change the light bulbs in the sewer tunnels. Micro? Now you might say,
Clockwolf, the reason the sewer tunnels are so well lit is because there's personnel from the lab using the cable car to go to and from their place of work. So the tunnels see a lot of foot traffic.
Well, if that's true, then that answers one question, but raises so many others. Like, why are scientists literally walking up shit creek to get to work? Because there doesn't seem to be a way to get to the cable car without walking through raw sewage. I know I'm probably overthinking this, but still, just saying. The police station had some really dark areas, and for some reason the sewer is just far more well lit. With the exception of one room in particular, the bottom waterway is probably the best worst room in the game, and yes, that's a good thing. This room seems to be where the G-adult sewer monsters made their home. Completely covered in what seems to be a sick fusion of mud, garbage, dead bodies, human shit, and organic biomass. It's absolutely disgusting. Most people probably ran through this room while trying not to pay much attention to anything except the water, which isn't hard to do because the room is nice and dark. I wish the whole sewer was like this room. The sewer monsters would have been much more challenging to fight if it was darker in the tunnels. But most importantly, it would have been scarier. In fact, this game seems to fall in quality in general when you leave the police station. And this is for a few reasons. First is the change in locations in the game from the police station to the sewer, which resets the pacing of the game flow. The sewer and the laboratory aren't that long, because finishing both of them takes up the entire last half of the game's total playtime, and roughly the first half of the game is spent in the police station. So you're never in one area long enough for the pacing to even get a chance to pick up the same way it was again. Another reason is because of the zombies in the sewers, or lack thereof. The police station was infested with zombies, but the sewer area is mostly focused on the G-adult sewer monsters. Another problem is the atmosphere in the sewer, and I don't just mean the lights. Remember when I talked about Resident Evil 4 in the beginning and said that the last third of the game wasn't as good as the rest of the experience? Because the military island you go to at the end wasn't as interesting as the village area or the castle area? It's the same problem here. A cold, dark, battle-scarred police station is hard to follow up with generic concrete maintenance tunnels and a literal river of shit. Look, I know it probably sounds like I hate the sewer monsters, but I don't hate them. They're just not very interesting to fight. As long as you don't fire all your ammo like it grows on trees when you're in the police station, or as long as you're not a bad shot, you should be able to get your way through the sewer monsters no problem. I did when I played the game. Saving up the ammo to kill them really isn't that hard. And it's not entirely the sewer monsters' fault, it's kind of backed up by the fact that they're not really in an interesting environment. Plus, the zombies would be really hard to follow up in the first place. I could probably fight the zombies in this game over and over and over again forever and not get bored. It's just a shame that the choices of the player don't matter as much here. In the words of every person who's ever had sex with me, I'm not mad, I'm just disappointed. But at least things start to pick up again in the next area. Moving on to the last area, the underground lab, or the nest. Which I don't know if that's an anagram, but if it is, I can't find what it means on Google, so yeah. Anyway, the nest is divided into 3 areas, the north, west, and east area. All 3 areas are connected together by a main shaft. The west area is basically a big boss arena, so we're just gonna skip it. Starting from the north area, both because it's where you enter the lab and because it's really small. After you exit the cable car, you walk onto the cable car platform where you come to a set of blast doors. You walk through the blast doors, there's a security room on your left and a reception desk on your right. There's a small office behind the reception desk and a door that goes to a dark hallway. At the end of it, you have the cafeteria and the kitchen connected by a maintenance shaft. You'll go through these rooms once and that's it. There's also a nap room that you'll have to go through twice to collect supplies behind one of the 3 electricity puzzles in the lab. Moving on to the east area, you have a series of rooms connected to a greenhouse, as well as a maintenance shaft with a ladder and some stairs that allow you to loop around through a sub-basement. This loop is connected by several rooms as well as 3 or 4 adjacent ones, and it's one you'll have to take at least twice. The labs have another new enemy type called the Ivy. First off, I like their appearance. They look cool. In the OG game from '98, the Ivy were humanoid plant monsters, but in this game the Ivy are zombies controlled by infected plants. They have these little yellow bulbs on their bodies that you need to shoot in order to stun them, and if you shoot enough of them they'll fall down. But they don't stay down for good because the only way to kill them is with Leon's flamethrower or Claire's grenade launcher. It seems as though the developers were trying to recapture the magic of the regenerators from Resident Evil 4. which has been a thing that the Resident Evil games have tried to do before. Do the Ivy pull this off? Well, no, but they look cool at least. But whether you like the Ivy's appearance or not, they are completely ruined by two things. The first one is their only attack is a one-hit kill attack. If they get close to you, they grab you and literally bite your head off unless you have an item to defend yourself. The second problem is that the Ivy are kind of boring to fight, and that's because of their main weakness, which is fire. Now, this has less to do with the design of the flame weapons themselves and more to do with the designs of the monsters and how they respond to their weakness. The fire weapons have a large splash damage effect radius, so all you need to do is point at a target and shoot. After you light up one of those vagina heads, they immediately fall on the ground and start flopping around like a fish out of water as they burn. And even after the fire goes out, they'll take their sweet time standing back up. So all you have to do is continue to hammer them with fire weapons as they're on the ground until they're dead, and they'll just lay there and let you kill them. When they die, they turn completely charred black, giving a definite indicator on whether or not they're dead. This makes fighting them very easy unless you're low on flame ammo. During my whole time playing, I died to the Ivy only 2 times. Once was in one of the bonus modes because I didn't have a defense item, and the other was intentional because I wanted to see what would happen. Remember when I was saying Mr. X was the second most one-dimensional enemy in the game? Well, the Ivy are number 1 by far. To the game's credit, it starts to pick up in the nest in terms of pacing and atmosphere. The darkness and the interesting environments are back, as well as the zombies. It's just really unfortunate that when the game starts to pick up the pace, it's over and you're done with the area. As I said, the sewers and lab are both short-lived, and I want to say I wish they were longer, but the sewer level has other problems to worry about. Those being the fact that it's not a very interesting place to be in general, and the fact that the sewer monsters are either an ammo dump or a pain in the ass to get around. And there is no easy fix for the sewer level without making serious changes to the map and/or the G-adult sewer monsters. And as for the lab, yeah, I would have liked it to have been longer. The Ivy are boring to fight, yes, but this has more to do with the fact that the Ivy and the whole lab area in general just feels undercooked. Adding 1 or 2 extra mechanics to the Ivy would fix them, and both for the sake of posterity and because it's fun to do what-if scenarios, let's just carry on. So what I would do is make it so the Ivy have 1 or 2 poison attacks. They're plant monsters, so it makes sense. The Ivy from 98 had a mid-ranged poison attack, so that could be a thing. Also, the bulbs on their bodies could emit a poisonous cloud when shot, giving the player even more reason to keep their distance. But most importantly, fire would not affect them in the same way. Instead of lighting them on fire and having them immediately flounder on the floor, I would have them frenzy and charge the player. And if you want to kill them, the best way would be to shoot the bulbs on their bodies and make them fall down so you can burn them while they're on the floor. So that way they can't frenzy you. These changes would have added the real-time decision-making to the Ivies that they desperately needed. Going back to the lab, it seemed really small to me when I first played it. In fact, I was expecting it to be way bigger, and I think it was supposed to be bigger than it is. If you look at the game's concept art, you can see most of the art in the police station is of stuff that is actually in the game. But that's probably because the police station in this game is based off the police station from the game made back in '98. The maps of both areas are pretty much identical. But the sewer and lab, however, are completely new maps that have been changed drastically from the original. There's not a lot of concept art for the sewer, but there's quite a bit for the lab. Most of the art for the lab is of stuff that never made it into the finished game. I mean, look at this. Doesn't this look cool? But maybe this was cut because the location of the lab was changed mid-development. Originally, you weren't supposed to go from the sewers and straight to the lab. The nest was originally supposed to be located in the Arkley Mountains. After leaving the sewers, you were supposed to go outside, get into a car, and drive to a dam facility with a whole driving gameplay section and everything. You then would need to get through the dam facility to get to a cable car located on the other side, which would take you to the laboratory located inside the mountain. They ultimately decided to cut this part of the game for simplicity's sake. This could have been the reason, but the external location of the nest shouldn't have affected its design internally because they were both going to be underground either way. This is mostly speculation on my part, but I just think that the lab area feels unfinished. Maybe the developers just ran out of time or budget? Who knows? And we may never know. But even though the second half of the game isn't as good as the first half, that doesn't mean it's not worth playing, because there are some genuinely fun moments in there that make finishing the game worth it. And despite the mostly negative things I've said about the G-Adult sewer monsters and the Ivy, they're actually not the worst enemies in the game. The title of the worst enemies in the game goes to the ones that were meant to be the most intense. I'm just gonna tell it to you straight. The boss battles in this game are bad. All of them. Every single one. All of this game's boss battles play out in exactly the same way. Shoot at the weak spots on the body until the boss runs toward you and tries to hit you. Dodge the incoming attacks by running away at the speed of an elderly Sunday jogger. Turn around once you have some distance. Shoot the weak spots on the body. Rinse and repeat until you trigger the cutscene letting you know it's all over. It's like this for every boss in the game except one, which is essentially just an ammo dump boss. I think it was around, I want to say the 10th or 9th playthrough of this game that I thought to myself, you know, I don't think I've enjoyed a single boss fight in this game. There's a total of 4 boss fights in this game, plus the 5th one that you fight at the end of the second run, where you get the game's true ending. The reason the boss battles in this game are bad is because the game locks you in a small area until the boss fight's over, and because the bosses themselves are too fast. No, your character being too slow isn't the problem, it's that the bosses are too fast. The slow and clunky movements of your character and the slow running speed is complemented well by the slow, lumbering movements of the zombies. The zombies in this game can't run, and your character shouldn't just be able to Usain Bolt their way past them. If the player or the zombies could run really fast, then that would be counterproductive to the methodical, slow-paced survival horror this game is going for. The same thing is true for the sewer monsters and the Ivy. Even the lickers, which are lightning fast, are best dealt with using slow movement. This design choice makes your character's slow movement into a strength for the overall experience, even though it is still technically a weakness for the character's survivability. It makes you consider many different factors before engaging in a fight, because you can't just simply dodge or run past all the enemies, at least not without some risk of getting attacked. Even if the game gave you a dodge function or the ability to run faster, it wouldn't fix the boss fights, because you would still be trapped in an area with them and the formula for beating them would still be the same. But instead of shoot, run, shoot, run, shoot, run, it would be shoot, dodge, and run instead. Unless a dodge function only worked on the bosses and didn't work on the zombies or any of the other enemies. But using up a button on a controller for a move you'll only be using like 20% of the time doesn't seem very practical. Adding a dodge function and allowing the player character to run faster would only serve to make a frustrating and mundane boss fight slightly less frustrating and mundane, at the expense of watering down and hurting the overall experience. I've said plenty of negative things about the sewer monsters and the Ivy, but at least they're slow moving like other enemies in the game, making it easy to put distance between yourself and them. And in future replays, they aren't that bad either, because you'll eventually learn how to save up ammo and kill them quickly with the equipment you have. The bosses, however, never get any better no matter how many times you replay the game. The feeling the game captures so well during future replays of becoming a badass strategic zombie killer is put on hold for the feeling of being a slow, clunky video game character who's using their limited set of movements to cheese the enemy to death. The second boss battle is even worse, being mostly a trial and error fight that requires some experimentation to win. When you fight G Stage 2, you need to press a button to activate a crane, hurt him enough until he's stun locked in place, and then press the button again to bring the crane back to have it hit him. Do this 1 or 2 times until it's over. There's multiple problems with this boss, but the biggest one is exactly what I just described. It's the exact same shooting and running as the G Stage 1 boss, but with a smaller combat arena that offers barely enough room to avoid his attacks, making it even more frustrating. Every single enemy in this game, and I mean every single one, including all of the boss battles, involves one similar thing, which is to separate yourself from them as quickly as possible, to run away and to get away from them. Except for this guy. This guy, the key to beating him is to push a button and stand in place behind a line for a few seconds and wait for a cutscene to trigger.
Fun!
The G Stage 3 fight is pretty much the same thing as G Stage 2, but in a circular arena and there's no crane. At least the devs had enough sense to make the boss arena bigger here, so that way evasion isn't as unreasonable as it was during G2. So there's that, I guess. The fourth boss in the game is different depending on whether or not you're playing as Leon or Claire. If you're playing as Claire, you fight G again in a Stage 4 transformation, and he is ugly looking. I like it. He looks like a Lovecraft monster. This is also the least awful boss fight in the game, in my opinion. The weak spot on the G4 Shoggoth is larger and easier to hit than it was before, and giving the player a minigun does help. But to be fair, I think the reason this moment was so cathartic for me when I first played it has more to do with the fact that the game is almost over, so you no longer need to worry about conserving ammo like you have been. It's nice to have an opportunity to go nuts with all your ammo and supplies after you're so close to the end. Even though this boss does play out the exact same way as the other ones with you circling a train car instead. Leon, however, gets the short end of the stick with his boss fight. The Tyrant in his final form looks really cool with his flaming claw arm and everything. He looks like he belongs in God of War. That being said, this fight plays out exactly the same way as the others, with there being one additional problem, and that's the fact that Tyrant has a one-hit kill charge attack in this boss fight. There is no way to dodge this attack, and there's no way to know it's coming if you're playing this game for the first time. I imagine most players who fought this boss the first time got killed at least once, unless they were like me and got lucky. To stop his charge attack, you need to either shoot his weak spot to stun him, or hide behind some debris. I got lucky. The reason why I didn't die to Tyrant the first time he used this attack on me was because I just so happened to be shooting at his weak spot when he was charging it up. People who fight him for the first time will have no way of preparing for this attack before he does it, and that's just unfair. The fifth and final boss fight at the end of the second run just has you standing there and shooting at G Stage 5, after he mutates again and goes full Azathoth. This is the boss that you unlock after the end of the game's second run, where you get the true ending of the game. The bosses in this game do look cool, with the final form of the Super Tyrant, G Stage 3, G Stage 4, even G Stage 5 looks really cool, regardless of the fact that he looks like a giant pocket pussy with teeth. Then again, maybe that's part of the problem. The boss battles in this game are very much presentation over substance and practicality, being cool to look at but offering little in the way of good creative gameplay. It's a shame because Resident Evil 4 had some really cool boss battles like El Gigante, Del Lago, and Verdugo. Those boss battles were grand in scale and presentation while also being fun and creative gameplay-wise. It's a bit of a shame that these boss battles don't hold up in the same way. After you finish the game, it will give you a letter grade. How good a grade you get depends entirely on how fast you beat the game. Yes, this game has a timer mechanic, which I know some people hate, but we'll get more into that in a minute. You also unlock the results page, so you can see how well you did. Yeah, I know this can be a bit overwhelming when you first see it, but it's actually really simple. You have your first run and your second run for both Leon and Claire. Standard and hardcore are for whichever difficulty you play the game on. In order to completely fill out the results page, you need to play through the game a minimum of 8 times. 4 times on standard difficulty for Leon and Claire's first and second runs, and another 4 times on hardcore difficulty. The letters represent how fast you finish the game, with A and S rank being the best grade you can get. You can get a better rank above S rank, which is S plus rank, which you get the same way you get an S rank, but you need to only save at typewriters 3 times. This is here for the fans who love speedrunning. Resident Evil games have a massive speedrunning community. And if speedrunning isn't your thing, you can just ignore it, but you'll miss out on some cool stuff like the Infinite Samurai Edge pistol. I told you that we would come back to that. All you need to do to unlock the Infinite Samurai Edge pistol is get an S rank on either Leon or Claire's first campaign, which is actually way easier than it sounds. My advice for new players, play on the first and second run on standard difficulty. Then play it again on hardcore difficulty and switch the characters around. For example, when I first played, I started with Leon on standard difficulty, and then on the second run I played as Claire. After that, I played the game again, only this time on Claire first, Leon second on hardcore difficulty, with the unlockable costumes. I feel as though this was the best way to play the game, and it's how I advise new players to play it as well. I got so good at playing as Claire on hardcore, by the time that I played her on standard for the S rank achievement, it was no sweat. In fact, it was so surprisingly easy that I decided to take it all the way. So, I did. This is what my results chart looked like a few weeks ago. This is what it looks like now. That's right, I got an S+ rank in everything. In fact, I 100%ed the entire game. It actually wasn't that hard to do. Not on the standard difficulty at least. That's because through all 4 times of me playing through the game's standard difficulty to get the S+ rank, I used the game's autosave system to get away without saving or dying, even though on my Leon standard difficulty S run, I died about 5 times. Let me explain. So when you play the game, you can see how long you were playing the game for in the corner of the pause menu. And if you die, you get sent to the game's death screen, which gives you 3 options for what you can do. Quit, which sends you back to the main menu. Load game, which gives you the option to go to the game's load menu to manually load a previous save of your choosing. Or continue, which will send you back to your most recent save, whether that be an autosave or a manual one at a typewriter. So if I were to play the game on hardcore difficulty where the autosaving is turned off and the game only autosaves once, which is at the gas station at the beginning where the game first gives you control of your character, and I were to die, let's say 1 hour into playing the game without saving at any typewriters, if I were to press the continue button and load the previous save, aka the only save that I have, the game would send me all the way back to the beginning at the gas station. And if I paused and looked at the timer in the corner, it would say that I've been playing for an hour even though I'm all the way back at the start. That's because even though you loaded the game, it still knows you died and it will hold that death and lost time against you. To circumvent this, just go to the Load Game tab in the pause menu, and then load the same save again and your time will be deleted. This goes for any time you die in the game. This makes getting an S+ rank on hardcore difficulty a challenge because you can only save at a typewriter 3 times. So you need to be somewhat careful about where you place your only 3 saves. On standard difficulty, this is easier because the game's autosave feature is turned on. So anytime I died, I just pressed continue to load the previous save, and then loaded it again from the pause menu, which completely deleted all of the lost time that I had, and it made getting the S+ rank on standard difficulty a breeze. Which brings me into my next real criticism with the game. The autosaves on standard difficulty are plentiful, so when you die and load the most recent save, you probably won't be set back that far. The autosaves are so generous in fact that there's almost no point in saving at a typewriter at all if you're playing on standard difficulty. In order to get an S+ rank, you need to finish the game in a certain time frame and only save at a typewriter 3 times or less. It seems kinda pointless to present the players with a challenge if you have a cheesy in-game exploit to circumvent the point of the entire challenge. They should have made it so that whatever grade you got on hardcore difficulty would have counted towards both your standard and hardcore scores, instead of forcing players to play on 2 separate difficulties to fill out all the scores on the results page. Just look at what my results chart looks like now. There's a reason why my standard difficulty runs all have 0 saves each and why my hardcore difficulty runs all have 3 saves each. I honestly didn't expect to 100% this game when I played it, but I thought it was important that I at least attempt to S+ rank everything for this video. And by the time I had all S+s, I only had a few things left to do to 100% the game. So I decided, fuck it, why not? To get all S+ rankings, you need to play through the game 8 individual times. That's not even counting the amount of times that you screw up and have to try again. The hardest one for me was Leon's second run on hardcore difficulty, taking me 4 failed attempts until I got it. So, what do you do for all that hard work? What do you get when you S+ rank everything? Honestly, mostly concept art. Yay? Don't get me wrong, you do get other stuff too. If you finish either Leon or Claire's first runs on hardcore difficulty with an S rank, you'll get the Infinite MP5 SMG. You also get 2 other guns if you finish either Leon or Claire's campaigns on hardcore difficulty with an S+ rank. I'm not gonna really bother talking about these other 2 guns, but needless to say that they are crazy OP. You don't actually need to get all S+ rankings and everything to get all the badass infinite weapons in the game. If you want to put the absolute minimum amount of work into getting all of the infinite weapons, all you have to do is complete Leon and Claire's campaigns on hardcore and get an S+ rank. This is the absolute bare minimum of what you need to do to unlock all of the best guns in the game. You can try to fill out your rankings chart with all S+ like I did, but the only reward for doing so is concept art, which is why I don't like this game's Day 1 DLC, or any Day 1 DLC really. All of the costumes that are in the game's DLC pack could have been rewards for beating the campaign on S+ rank. That would have been a lot more rewarding than concept art. Keep in mind, what I'm about to say is not based on anything credible, so you should take it with a grain of salt. But I would go as far as to say that the costumes in the DLC pack were meant to be in the main game, but were cut out to be sold to us, as is the case with most Day 1 DLC. If you think about the rewards and how they're handed out for completing various things in the game, in correlation with the actual DLC, it kinda makes sense. You don't get an MP5 submachine gun at any point during the game's main campaign. You only get this gun when you play one of the game's bonus modes. It also takes a minimum of 8 campaign playthroughs to get an S+ rank on everything, while there are 7 costumes. If I were designing this game, I would have made it so that you got the Infinite Samurai Edge pistol for getting your first S rank. The Infinite SMG would have been rewarded to the player in the main game for unlocking and completing all the bonus modes. The 7 costumes could have been rewards for completing 7 of the game's 8 playthroughs with an S+ rank, with 1 new costume given out for each. And during the final S+ playthrough, it could have given you the other 2 overpowered infinite weapons. It would have been a good way to make all the hard work of getting to where the player has their results page all filled out with the best possible scores feel a lot more rewarding. Having rewards that inspire players to do the best they can, and have those rewards have effects that they could see in the game. That would have gone a long way to establish that sense of pride and accomplishment for unlocking different heroes. Oh, I mean costumes. But no, you get some concept art, character models for the game's diorama gallery, and an arbitrary letter and math symbol that just gives you a figurative pat on the back for all your hard work. That's not to say that this game is not worth replaying. In fact, this game has a lot of replayability. That is, if you actually like what the game has on offer. The game will slowly drip feed you additional resources throughout its whole experience. And I don't just mean ammo and health items. Inventory space, guns, even new paths to navigate through the game's levels. Combine this with the RNG damage mechanics and the unpredictable nature of the enemies, it allows the game to give the player more options without ever letting them feel too powerful, making sure that fear of the unknown and that feeling of being vulnerable never goes away. Eventually, what starts as a tense survival horror game turns into a badass third-person zombie horror action shooter with a couple of light strategy elements. So every time you play, it gives you that feeling of wanting to play again to see if you can do better a second, third, or fourth time around, hoping the game's somewhat unpredictable nature combined with a newfound knowledge of how to proceed rolls in your favor. The letter grade and the timer mechanic are just there to give the player an additional drive and acknowledgement for all their hard work. But you really need to like the game for what it is to appreciate what it sets out to do for multiple playthroughs. Now, let's talk about the story in the game. Resident Evil games have never been known for having the best stories, and this game is no exception. The story in this game, and most Resident Evil games, are usually just goalposts to drive along the gameplay. And that's why the best stories for these games are usually simplistic and campy cheese fests. The premise is that you go into a city that's being attacked by zombies and you find out the cause is human experiments gone wrong that's funded by a massive billion-dollar corporation. It's a very cheesy and cliche premise, and this game knows it, because it's part of a video game series that invented those cliches more than 20 years ago. One of the biggest criticisms of the story is the amount of continuity errors in it. The biggest one is the boss fight in the nest with Stage 4 G. Birkin. If both Leon and Claire's stories are supposed to be happening at the same time, then there's no way that both Leon and Claire fighting G4 could possibly be canon in the game's lore. It looks like this could have been a mistake that made it past the playtesters, but I think this was an intentional design choice by the developers, because games like this require a lot of time and money to make, and the Resident Evil 2 remake was in development for at least 4 years before it was released. You would think that developing a game that was a remake would be easy because you already have a blueprint for what you're about to do before you even start, but that's actually not how it works. When you're remaking a game like this, you don't have as much creative freedom, and they did have to change certain things to fit the development cycle. With the change in this game's engines, camera, and controls, I imagine that making a replica of the locations of the first game would be a challenge. In fact, I think the police station may have been the hardest area to develop just because of how similar the two maps are between the two games. At the end of the day, both Leon and Claire's first and second runs actually aren't that different from each other. For example, if you were to play Leon first and Leon second back to back, the differences to note about the gameplay would be that you would have different starting points with a different starting handgun, Mr. X would show up sooner to give it to you, the lobby isn't a safe place anymore, it's filled with zombies and you have no typewriter or box, and the solutions to the puzzles are different. What are the differences in the story? In the second run, you don't meet the cop in the police station, and you fight the giant vagina monster at the end of the second run. The differences between the gameplay and the story being affected are night and day, even if they are ultimately just small tweaks. The devs of this game clearly saw the remake story as an ancillary part of the game while making sure that it had just enough in common with the original story to make the OG fans happy. They could have tried to tell a deeper, more fleshed out story this time around, but they would have had to likely have changed some of the game's canon lore to do so, which could and likely would have made the hardcore fan base angry. I'm personally fine with the story it has here. Yes, it's nothing special, but that's fine. It does what it needs to, and it's mostly inconsequential to the game anyway, or at least the first half of it. Playing a Resident Evil game for the story and complaining it's not very memorable is like playing Doom for the story and complaining it's not very memorable. It's not that those complaints are wrong, it's just that anyone who does that is missing the point. Also, anytime either of these game franchises attempt to tell a deep and serious story, it just ends up hurting the rest of the experience. Next, let's talk about the DLC and unlockable bonus modes that you play when you finish the game. The first one being the 4th Survivor campaign, where you play as the gas mask wearing mercenary, Hunk. It's good to see the debut of this character because the only place I knew him from before was as a playable character in the Resident Evil 4 Mercenaries mode. I still remember trying to beat that mode using Hunk and his neck break move. He was also the only playable character in Mercenaries that wasn't featured in the game. So when I saw him, I thought to myself, who's this guy with the gas mask? He wasn't in the game. The origins of this character are unknown and unimportant. Just know that you're the only survivor of an Umbrella mercenary unit called Alpha Team. He's referred to as the 4th Survivor because he's one of the 4 characters that escape Raccoon City alive. The others being Leon, Claire, and Sherry Birkin. Ada Wong doesn't count because she's a ghost. So not only did she not survive, she was never in the city in the first place. Anyway, this bonus mode is probably the toughest test of your knowledge of the game's various mechanics. You'll need to run all the way from the sewers to the front of the police station. And the game makes you do this by forcing you to take the absolute longest route possible. You'll have a preset weapon and equipment loadout in your inventory, so you won't be able to pick things up or go to the magic box. When you're running through the sewers and through the police station towards the exit, the game will throw every enemy it can at you. By the way, if you have the original soundtrack playing, just turn it off before you start the 4th Survivor campaign. The 4th Survivor campaign song called Looming Dread is actually a really cool song. Ironically, the remake's soundtrack for Hunk sounds way cooler than the original, because not only does the beat roughly fall in line with Hunk's running animation, but when I hear this song out of context, the first thing that I feel is a feeling of rush, like I'm in a hurry to do something, which is perfect for the Fourth Survivor campaign since you're trying to rush to the exit. Which helps fertilize a breeding ground for some really funny memes. Me looking for my phone charger on 1% battery. When your Uber shows up while you're still in the shower. When your girl's parents aren't home but you have to pick up dinner on the way to her house. By the way, the Fourth Survivor campaign is considered canon in the game's lore. So yeah, you know how they say every gamer has one video game genre that they're good at? Well, I think my genre is RPGs and resource management games, because I finished the Fourth Survivor campaign on my second attempt at playing it. It actually wasn't that hard. The only reason I died the first time is because I got lost and didn't know where I was going, so I ran down a dead-end hallway. I've actually run through the Fourth Survivor campaign more times than the main one at this point. It's not that hard once you learn what enemies to run past, what enemies to shoot, and where to toss your grenades. Tofu mode is, well, despite its funny appearance because you are playing as a literal block of tofu, is basically Hunk's campaign with a different weapon loadout. You unlock this campaign by finishing the Fourth Survivor mode, and after you finish Tofu, you unlock 2 more Tofu characters. And after finishing one of those 2, you unlock 2 more Tofu characters, each one with their own preset weapon loadout. Tofu, that's the first guy, and yes, that's his name, and yes, he's a boy, at least according to the wiki, is armed with only knives and a few herbs. Riro Mochi, I probably botched that all the way up, in real life is actually closer to being a cake than it is a tofu. But in Resident Evil 2, he's a mean green grenade throwing machine. Konjac, a popular dietary food in Japan for weight loss and people who need more fiber in their diet, probably has the most well-rounded loadout in this game mode, with Claire's grenade launcher, Leon's flamethrower, and some defense and healing items to get himself out of a jam. Anin tofu, or almond tofu, is a type of sweet jelly or pudding. He's also the hardest tofu in the bunch to play, armed with 2 handguns, some herbs, and a knife. You'll need to stun monsters and just tank hits wherever you can. Flan is definitely the oddball of the 5. I guess flan does count as what the Japanese would consider to be tofu, but it actually didn't originate in Japan. The origins of flan can be traced back to the ancient Romans, which was the first society to domesticate chickens to harvest their eggs. And with that came new cooking recipes for those eggs. Flan isn't even the original name for the dish, with the name flan being a rough English translation of a word in medieval Latin, flando, which means flat cake. She's also the strongest member of the Tofu crew, having the strongest arsenal of weapons out of all of them. And yes, Flan is a female. She has a minigun, a spark shot, an M202A1 flash rocket launcher, and 2 flash grenades. I really appreciate the short arcadiness of the Fourth Survivor mode and the Tofu modes. Most people who play these modes will finish them in about 9 to 12 minutes, which is why I've played Tofu mode and the Fourth Survivor mode at least twice as much as the actual game at this point. It embodies everything that Resident Evil 2 becomes after you play it enough times, but in a much smaller and more concentrated format. It's good to play this mode when you just want to jump into some RE2 for a few minutes instead of a few hours. The Ghost Survivors DLC is a free DLC you can download with your purchase of the game. It has you completing 3 what-if scenario campaigns of characters that die during the events of the main game. having not too subtle nods to Call of Duty Zombies with gumball machine item dispensers and hats that are rewards for completing specific milestones. Honestly, I wish you could equip these hats in the main campaign. Each of the 3 campaigns have their own unique enemy types. The Runaway will have you fighting fast and regenerating types of zombies called Paleheads. No Time to Mourn will have purple zombies that emit a poisonous cloud when killed, and Foreign Soldier has zombies that are covered in body armor. Again, I wish all of this was in the main game. Fighting the zombies is the best part of RE2 Remake, and I wish there were more kinds of zombies in some of the given areas. There's also an unlockable bonus mission at the end of the DLC that's literally Call of Duty Zombies, or at least the remake's watered down interpretation of it. I don't know if a fully fleshed version of Call of Duty Zombies is possible with this game's formula, but I would welcome the opportunity for the developers to try. And that's the remake of Resident Evil 2, a game that accomplishes the impossible by making zombies scary again despite the public overexposure to the media, as well as giving the player the feeling of becoming a zombie-killing badass organically. At least in the first half of the game, the second half in the sewers and in the lab, as well as the boss fights, do little to contribute to the survival horror or the zombie fighting power fantasy the game puts forward, making the second half of the game feel somewhat derivative, and I realize that's a somewhat ballsy statement to make given that I've never played the original game that it's based off of. Remember during the beginning when I was talking about the previous entries in the franchise and I said that it was to make a point at the end of the video? Well, here we are. The game does a great job with zombies and mostly everything in the police station, save for a few nitpicks, and how the first and second runs in the game all kind of feel similar to each other. Everything else in this game feels similar in tone and presentation to the more recent Resident Evil games. The sewer monsters feel like they belong in Resident Evil 5, given how fighting them is the best option as opposed to avoiding fighting them. The Ivy monsters feel like poor attempts to capture the fear of the regenerators from Resident Evil 4, and even the bosses feel like they belong in Resident Evil 6 a small bit. Apart from a few visual elements, this game doesn't seem to lean into its mostly campy nature as much as the older games in the series, instead going for a more serious and gritty undertone, which I think could have been one of this game's biggest downfalls if it was focused on any more than it was. This game franchise has been torn between action horror and survival horror for a long time, and that's clearly affecting the direction of these games in development, both in gameplay and story. I don't think Capcom knows what they want to do with the Resident Evil license at this point. The limitations of technology that existed back in the 90s when the original Resident Evil trilogy was made is no longer a problem. If they were to make a fixed camera RE game today, they would run the risk of making the game feel like a downgrade from the modern games from a gameplay standpoint. Like it or not, some people don't like tank controls with fixed cameras for the same reason that some people don't like turn-based combat. Tank controls with fixed cameras can be a net positive to a game if used correctly, but at the same time you can't argue that those things are technically relics of the limitations on past technology. The RE2 remake, however, feels derivative in parts that appear to be influenced by the newer games rather than the older ones, which puts me in an awkward position as a reviewer who's never played the original Resident Evil 2 game from '98, because you could say,
Of course it feels a little derivative. It's a remake of a game that came out 20 years ago.
which is fair criticism of my criticism. All I can do is examine the game from as many angles as I can and draw as many conclusions as I can from the information I have available. I am cautiously optimistic to play this game's sequel, the Resident Evil Nemesis Remake, when it comes out, which has already been confirmed to be in development. I say cautiously optimistic and not excited because what works in the remake of 2 likely won't work in the remake of 3. If you play Resident Evil 2 Remake enough, you'll know the whole game like the back of your hand. And just placing the same zombies in a different map with a Nemesis skin on Mr. X won't work to justify a sequel in my opinion. But I guess we'll see if the developers can circumvent player expectations a second time when it comes out. Hey there, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for watching my Resident Evil 2 Remake review and analysis video. I hope y'all enjoyed it. I worked really hard on it. It took me a really long time to make. Been working on this video for like, oh god, over a month and a half now. Let me tell you, when you don't know how to script out a video, it's actually really hard. This is my first time scripting a video out and my first time doing a game review at all, so yeah. That's why it took me so long. At first, I was going to make this like a spoiler-free review video. I honestly didn't know what I was going to do with this video when I started making it. I just knew I wanted to talk some more about Resident Evil 2 Remake, but I didn't know what I was gonna do with it, so it ended up turning into a review. At first I thought, okay, you know what, I'm gonna make this a full review and it's gonna be spoiler free, and then I realized, oh, I actually can't make it spoiler free without skipping over the points that I wanted to make. So then I was gonna make one half of the video spoiler free and the other half not spoiler free. And I edited the video like halfway. I got the video halfway done till I realized, okay, yeah, that doesn't work either because it just fractures the points that I wanted to make. So I had to completely change the script like halfway through making the video. You can probably see traces of that in the video. And in the end, I ended up with this weird amalgamation of a review and an analysis video. It's gonna feel real good when I finally upload this video. Making it in some areas was a huge pain. I have never written a script or read off a script for a YouTube video before, like I said, so I would end up stumbling over all of my words and I would need to repeat myself over and over and over again when I wasn't reading the words crystally clear off the paper, and I would get mad and I would start yelling and I would raise my voice to make my voice sound more clear, which you could probably hear during the whole first hour of this video and in other parts. But yeah, I like this. I had fun with this. I want to do more stuff like this. And there is some stuff that I didn't bother to really talk about in this video, like the story, for instance. I mean, this video was going on long enough, first of all, and secondly, I felt like there was a lot of nuances that I was going to miss if I talked about the story. Because I never played the original game, and I kind of feel like that may have been a mistake. Should I have played the original game before making this video? I really don't know. Let me know if you want me to go back and play Resident Evil 2, the original one from 1998. I might do it. I don't know how the hell I'm going to pull that off. There's not really any place you can buy it new right now. There aren't exactly a million copies of the disc for the original game floating around online and on Amazon and stuff. So if I did go back and I did play the original game from '98, I would have to probably get it working on PC, and I hear it requires a lot of PC magic tricks to get the game working on a modern computer. So that sounds like a lot of work. I don't know, I might do it, I might not, we'll see how that works out. And I would honestly like to play the original Resident Evil game first before getting into the second game. Which, by the way, I do plan on making a video about Resident Evil 1 in the future. I'm thinking maybe the HD remaster. I don't know, we'll see how that works out. Currently, there's at least 2 other things I want to do before I get around to that, but we'll see how that works out in time. But yeah, overall, making this video was fun. I want to make more videos like this. This was cool. And if I do end up making that Resident Evil 2 1998 video, it will be a follow-up to this video. It won't necessarily be a review, its own thing. It'll be more like a direct follow-up to this, like a part of this video. Since I would probably be repeating a lot of the same points from this video in that video, so it doesn't make a lot of sense to review it as its own original thing. Anyway, thank you all for watching! Oh! If you like this video, make sure to like, comment, subscribe, and I will see you all in the next video.